I was 5 years old when the forest took me, not in a scary way. At least, that's what I keep telling myself now. The city of Valor had its lantern festival every summer, music everywhere, street food, burnt sugar, and river fish. My mother used to say the lantern festival was proof that gods existed. How else could something that beautiful happen here? I remember running ahead of her through the crowd. I remember the edge of the sacred forest, where the lanterns went wrong. The lights moved sideways instead of swaying, pulled instead of floated, looked almost like they had opinions about it. And then I remember nothing from that night at all. Because the next thing I knew, I wasn't 5 years old anymore. I was 25, and the forest was letting me go like it had somewhere better to be, and I was the last thing on the list. My name is Kai Ash, 20 years in a spirit forest. Before you ask? Yes, I know how that sounds. No, I can't summarize it faster. Most people in my position would panic, cry, try to claw their way back into the trees and demand a better explanation for all of it. But I didn't do any of that. I just stood there in the same shirt I'd been wearing at 5 years old, which did not fit, not even close. And I looked at the city I'd grown up in and thought one very specific thought. It got uglier, considerably uglier. Valor spread out below the ridge like someone had kicked over a pile of bricks. Taller buildings, meaner, very gray. The docks looked bloated and overcrowded. The old temple district, which I'd loved as a child, was half demolished. Even the lanterns were different, cheaper, the kind that gutter and die fast instead of burning slow and warm the way I remembered. I hadn't seen the city in 20 years, and the city hadn't thought about me in 20 years either. It had simply moved on completely. A child named Kai Ash vanished during the Lantern Festival 2 decades ago. They searched for 3 days, found nothing at all. No body. No footprints past the tree line, no evidence, so they declared him dead, held a small funeral, planted a memorial tree. My mother moved on. My neighbors moved on. The whole city of Valor moved on and built new things and forgot about me entirely. And me? I was busy learning things no living human had touched in 1,000 years. Very relaxing situation for everyone involved. The root-born spirits don't look the way you'd expect ancient forest immortals to look. No glowing, no floating, no dramatic robes. Elder Sewell, who found me on that Lantern Festival night and brought me to the others, looked like a very old woman made of bark. She moved like water that had decided to become a person for a while, but hadn't fully committed to the bit. Very slow, very deliberate. She spoke slowly, not because she was ancient, though she was absolutely ancient, but because she believed words deserved to land properly. The first thing she ever said to me, standing in that clearing, was, "You are not lost, small one. You are early. I was 5. I thought she was saying I'd arrived before the party started, which seemed fine. I was willing to wait. I had apparently been told I had good manners. By the time I was 15, I understood what she meant. By 25, I understood it better than I had ever wanted to. The Rootborn had been waiting for someone like me, not because I was special. They were very clear about that, multiple times. I was not chosen. I was not prophesied. No ancient text had my name in it. No destiny had been written anywhere referring to me. I was simply the only child who had ever looked at the wrong lights in the sacred forest and felt curiosity instead of fear. Most children ran when they saw it. Every single one who'd come close had turned and sprinted back. The Rootborn had watched for centuries. I walked toward it. I walked toward the wrong lights because I wanted to know what was making them move like that. That's the whole story. That says more about my survival instincts than my courage. But Elder Sewell said curiosity was rarer than talent, and she meant it. She said the world was full of talented people who ran from the interesting thing, who chose safety over what they didn't understand. She said real curiosity, the kind that moves toward the unknown instead of away from it, was the only thing that ever changed anything important. I believed her. I had 20 years of evidence by the end of my time in that forest. Elder Sewell was not a person who said things lightly. The magic they taught me doesn't have a human name anymore. The closest translation is root speech, the language the world used before it forgot, before stone and water and wood stopped being considered valid participants in a conversation, before the old agreements fell apart and were not renewed. Root speech isn't about fire, isn't about lightning, isn't about making things explode impressively. It's much quieter than all of that. It lets you feel memory, not your own, the memory of places, the memory of materials, the memory of the world around you, patient and complete. Old stone remembers what happened on it, every footstep, every argument, every quiet moment, and every catastrophic one without distinction. Water remembers where it has been. Every river and rain cloud and glass it was ever poured into, in a long, patient sequence. Trees remember everything, and trees have genuinely appalling, exhaustive memory for detail that nobody ever asked them to retain. They remember in sequence. They remember emotional context. They have opinions about what they've witnessed and will share those opinions freely. I once spent 3 days listening to a pine tree describe an argument two farmers had in 1340 over a fence post, every word in sequence. The pine had a take on who was right. It was deeply committed to that take. It wanted me to understand about the fence post. 3 full days. That's the thing about ancient magic. It is not fast. It is not dramatic. It does not make you feel powerful in a satisfying way at all. It makes you feel like a very slow archivist who never sleeps, surrounded by objects that want to explain themselves whether you asked or not. But it does other things too, things that matter more. It lets you see what's buried beneath the surface of the world, what's been hidden deliberately, what wants to rise, what's being held down, and by what, and for how long, and whether the holding is still working. And when Elder Sewell finally said it was time for me to go back, when she put her bark-rough hand against my face and looked at me, she said, "There is something old waking in Valor. Older than the city, older than the families who built it, older than their wall." She pressed her forehead to mine. Her skin was cold and smelled like old wood after rain. "It has been patient," she said, "but patience ends." Then she stepped back. The forest released me. One moment I was inside the trees. The next, the path behind me was simply no longer there. 20 years of training. 20 years of learning a dead language from immortal teachers who did not believe in rest days or easy lessons. And I walked out into the sunlight in the same shirt I'd worn at 5 years old, which now fit like a very ambitious handkerchief. Carrying nothing except knowledge and a few coins the spirits had given me, so I wouldn't arrive completely penniless. They considered that rude. The first human I encountered was a woman selling roasted nuts at a cart near the forest road. She gave me the look I'd earned many times today. The specific look you give something that doesn't belong to the category it's standing in, like a chair standing in the ocean. Fine, technically. But questions. I bought nuts with one of the coins, asked her what year it was. She told me. I did the math, checked it twice. Got the same answer both times. Then I said, "Okay, thank you," and walked toward the city. She kept staring at me like I was the strange one here. Maybe fair. I was wearing the shirt. When you come back from 20 years in a spirit forest, everything is jarring. The people are louder, faster, more of them, packed into less space. The buildings are taller and closer together than I remembered. The smell of the docks hits you half a mile before you reach them when the wind is right. And the magic in Valor, or what passed for magic here, was thin. Commercial. Kind of sad in the specific way that stretched things are sad. I passed 3 magic shops in the first street I walked down after entering through the south gate. Love charms, protective talismans, luck essence. One sold luck essence in a little glass bottle for 8 copper coins, with a label describing a spiritual refinement process. Very confident label. I picked up a bottle and listened to it with my fingertips. Root speech is involuntary now. My hands hear things whether I want them to or not. The bottle remembered being filled in a warehouse by a man who was thinking about lunch. He'd settled on soup. Happy with the soup. That was all. That was the complete spiritual content of the luck essence. I put it back. The woman behind the counter thought I was going to steal it. The city had been running on the memory of magic for a very long time, selling the feeling of it, selling the story. 8 copper coins per bottle. But the actual substance of it, the weight, the depth, the thing that root speech was a language for, was somewhere else, somewhere lower. I kept walking, past the magic shops, past a tavern that smelled like morning but was already open, past a secondhand clothing stall that looked like mine would be later. The further I walked into the city, the more I noticed the way it had changed around the things it hadn't changed. Old buildings wedged between new ones. Streets that hadn't been widened even when the buildings on either side of them went up taller. A city that had grown fast in some places and not at all in others. The parts that hadn't changed were the parts nearest the forest. I noticed that. The neighborhoods closest to the tree line were older, quieter, more intact, like the city had unconsciously kept its distance from the edge of itself closest to the sacred forest. Not dramatically, just slightly, just enough to notice if you were looking. And something, deep below the cobblestones of Valor, was beginning to remember that it existed. I felt it the moment my boots touched city stone. Not a sound, not a light. A vibration that came up through the soles of my feet. Slow, ancient, wrong in its own very specific and deliberate way. Like a heartbeat that had forgotten what rhythm was actually for. Beating because it had always beaten. The original purpose long since irrelevant. I stopped. Put my hand flat on the wall of the nearest building, a textile merchant's, about 60 years old, and listened through the stone. The building remembered its tenets, its arguments. The small fire in the back room 11 years ago that had been caught just before it spread. But beneath the building, beneath its foundations, beneath the older cobblestone the newer city was built on top of. The stone was scared. Not the way people are scared. Stone doesn't feel like we do. But stone remembers, and what this stone remembered it was hoping to keep forgotten. I stood there with my hand on that wall for 2 full minutes. People walked around me. One man told me the wall wasn't for leaning on. I said I wasn't leaning, I was listening. He gave me the look that indicated this was the least helpful possible response and moved on without me. Then I straightened up and kept walking. Elder Sewell had sent me back for a reason. That reason was below the city I'd grown up in. And based on the vibration, based on the quality of the fear in the stone, I had approximately 2 weeks before it stopped waiting. Great. Perfect. A very relaxing homecoming situation. Everything going exactly as I had hoped. Totally fine. This is completely fine. I needed 3 things in order. First, clothes that actually fit. Second, somewhere to sleep. Third, information about what was happening below this city. The clothes problem was solved by a second-hand stall at the South Market, run by an old man who asked no questions and visibly wanted none. I had the carved wooden token the Rootborn had given me. Elder Sewell had pressed it into my hand with a look that meant, "This matters. Take it." The old man's hands recognized it immediately. I watched it happen. Fingers closed around it, breathing changed, eyes came to my face and reassessed. He said it was Rootborn work. He'd seen one once before, a long time ago, in circumstances he chose not to elaborate on. His hands were shaking. I traded the token for plain, dark clothes that fit, a worn coat in good condition, and boots that were slightly too large but workable for walking. He looked at me the whole time like he was afraid of something he couldn't name and didn't want to try to put into words. I filed that away. People in this city knew more than they admitted about the forest and what came from it. The knowledge was there, it just wasn't talked about openly. The somewhere to sleep situation was less elegant. I found an inn called the Coppernail, either a very honest name or a very bad omen indeed. Before I found it, I spent an hour walking the old neighborhoods near the South Market, relearning the geography of the city I'd grown up in. Some of it matched my memory. The canal bridge near the temple was still there, which surprised me, given how much else had been rebuilt. The Baker's Street was still a Baker Street, which was probably the most comforting thing I'd encountered since getting back. Some things are too useful to change, but the temple itself was different. The one I remembered, old stone, the Rootborn symbol above the door, the kind of place built for something it was still waiting to do. That temple was gone. What stood in its place was newer, cleaner, with signage that advertised regular services and a donation box near the door. Somewhere in the process of modernizing, the city had quietly removed the things that connected it to the old world. Not dramatically, just steadily, just consistently. Nobody noticed, because when you remove things slowly enough, each change seems like progress. The loss only shows when you stand back and look at what's simply not there anymore. Paid for one night with the remaining coins. The innkeeper gave me a room with a window facing a wall and a bed that had seen better decades. I sat on the edge of it and put my hands on the floor. The building was 80 years old, 17 tenants, 3 arguments, 1 death, 1 wedding, and 1 incident from 40 years ago that the floorboards had clearly never emotionally recovered from. I decided not to inquire about that one. The stone beneath the building was much older, and beneath that stone, deeper and heavier than anything the building's 80 years could account for. Something was breathing, not lungs breathing. The slow exchange of something old with the material around it. Patient, rhythmic, wrong. I lifted my hands, stood up. Okay, I thought, information. Let's go find information and think about this properly. The city's Hall of Records was the kind of building that believed paperwork was a form of worship. High ceilings, very serious windows, serious clerks. Clerks who moved with the energy of people who'd found their meaning in filing and organizing, and were determined to protect that meaning from careless visitors. I walked in and asked for records of unusual geological events in the last decade. Ground shifts, structural reports, subsidence surveys. The clerk looked at me with professional neutrality. I clarified. Anything about the ground moving wrong. She pointed at a far desk without eye contact. The records were organized in a way that suggested the system had been designed by someone who believed information should be earned through effort. I found what I was looking for anyway. Because paper has excellent memory for where it's been touched, and 20 years of root speech teaches you to read it. 17 separate reports. Over 12 years, 7 different neighborhoods across Valor, different language, different levels of formality. Same conclusion. The ground had done something strange. Not catastrophically strange, though these weren't disaster reports. But strange. Subsidence that didn't match the soil. Cracks in foundations appearing from below rather than above. Vibrations that residents reported at odd hours, in patterns that matched nothing external. Each report had been filed, reviewed, and concluded, 17 times, across 12 years. Same conclusion every single time, natural settling. Investigation complete. I read the last one, filed 6 months ago, Deep Market District. Foundations cracking from below in a pattern the engineer had noted was inconsistent. Investigation concluded, natural settling. The name at the bottom of every single one of those 17 reports was the same. Advisor Drax, City Council. 17 reports, 12 years, one man, one conclusion. Every time, without variation, without exception, without any sign of hesitation or doubt. I sat with that for a long moment. Then I put the report back exactly where I'd found it and thought about what it meant. Cover-ups aren't always sinister. The word implies intent, and intent matters. Sometimes people choose the comfortable explanation. It's just easier for everyone. Sometimes it's fear. Sometimes it's professional self-preservation. Writing natural settling is safer than writing, I don't know what this is. And sometimes someone knows exactly what they're writing over and they're doing it very deliberately. I needed to find out which category this was. Advisor Drax, 17 reports, 12 years, one conclusion. The most consistently unlucky investigator in Vaylor's history, or something else entirely. I walked out of the Hall of Records into the afternoon light. The city smelled like salt and coal and something frying that smelled better than it should. I stood on the front steps for a moment, thinking about Advisor Drax, about what kind of person writes the same report 17 times across 12 years. Either he was genuinely oblivious, which seemed unlikely given the range of the reports, from different engineers in different districts, all flagging the same kind of anomaly. Or he understood exactly what he was looking at, and had been deciding each time that the best response was to write 2 words and move on. Natural settling. Or, and this was the option I didn't like, he was managing it. Not hiding it because he was afraid of it. Managing it because he had a relationship with it. Because he knew what was down there, and he had reasons of his own for wanting it to wake on its own schedule rather than being disrupted by an investigation. That was the kind of thought that required more information before I could do anything with it. But I filed it carefully, where I could get back to it quickly. People move the way city people move. Fast, head down, with the focused energy of those who have somewhere specific to be and no time to waste. The Rootborn always found that quality of attention strange. They looked everywhere, up, down, sideways, into the memory of the ground beneath them. They thought it genuinely puzzling that humans built a way of living that encouraged looking only forward, only at eye level, only at what was immediately next. I looked up. The sky above Vaylor was wrong. Not dramatically. Not in a way you'd name if someone asked you to describe what was wrong with it. But the light was slightly off. The quality of it, the way it fell on the buildings, the flatness to it. A slight draining quality in the color, like something beneath was very steadily pulling at the vitality of the day from underneath. You wouldn't notice it without knowing what to look for. I stood there looking up at the slightly wrong sky until someone walked directly into my shoulder with the energy of someone who had places to be. A young woman. City Guard colors, dark jacket, silver badge with the Vaylor municipal crest, short, dark hair, quick brown eyes, posture that said capable. She bounced off my shoulder with the ease of someone who'd done that kind of rapid self-correction before, in situations where being surprised was inconvenient. "Excuse you," she said. Then she looked at me properly and stopped. There was a moment where she was simply deciding what she was looking at. Something about my eyes always makes people stop. Elder Sewell told me they changed during training. They see too much now for the face to fully hide it. She said people find it disorienting to have something look at them that sees more than they expected to be seen. I've found this consistently accurate. This woman didn't look disoriented. She looked curious, specifically sharply curious, the way a person looks when something turns out to be unexpectedly interesting. "Who are you?" she said. Not quite a question. The kind of statement that expects an answer but isn't demanding one, leaving you the space to decide. "Kai Ash," I said. Just the name with nothing attached to it and nothing following it. Just Kai Ash and the weight of what that meant in this city. Something moved through her face. Not recognition exactly. She was too young to remember me, but the name landed differently than names usually do. "That's a ghost's name," she said quietly. Not an accusation. More like she needed to say it out loud to process what she was thinking about. "I know," I said. And I kept walking. No elaboration, no explanation. Just those 4 words and the weight of them settling in the air behind me. Behind me, I heard her stay, stopped. Still there, turning that name over, when I rounded the corner at the end of the block. Good. I needed someone in this city who could ask questions without flinching from the answers. She was already more useful than anyone else I'd met today. Someone who heard a ghost's name from someone clearly not dead and responded with curiosity rather than confusion or well-meaning retreat. A specific quality? I filed her away for later. I'd need allies before this was over, and she had exactly the right instincts for what was coming in this city. The evening came in fast off the harbor, that slow orange light that makes even ugly rebuilt cities look like they deserve to exist after all. I found a bench near the old canal and sat with my hands resting on the worn wood, just breathing for a moment, just listening. The canal water remembered every ship, every season, 400 years of tides and weather and the slow, patient work of a waterway. But underneath all of it, underneath all the human accumulation and the centuries of commerce and argument, there was the other thing, the slow rhythm. Below the canal, below the oldest stone, below everything the city had built on top of itself in 400 years of trying. I sat and let myself feel it properly for the first time, not the glancing background awareness I'd been carrying all day, the actual presence. And it was enormous. That was the first thing. Enormous in a way that was hard to put into language because the words we have for size are about space, and this was something else. It wasn't spatially enormous. It wasn't filling a cavern beneath the city or pressing against the bedrock from some vast physical mass. It was old, enormous, dense with accumulated time. The way a single small stone can contain the memory of 400 years of everything that happened near it, until the memory has more weight than the stone. What was below Valor had been there for longer than the city, longer than the settlements before the city, longer than the roads or the paths or the first humans who had stood on this ground. And it had been aware of all of it, not indifferently aware, not the way a mountain is present without caring. This thing had been watching, registering, waiting for something specific. For some condition it was measuring against some standard that I didn't yet have the vocabulary to name, for the world to arrive at a particular moment. The canal lapped quietly against its embankment. Somewhere a boat was moving. The city went about its evening without any idea that I was sitting on its bench listening to the thing below it think. It was old. Old in a way that made the canal seem recent, that made 4-century-old stone seem freshly placed. Mountain old. Geography old. It remembered Valor from before the city existed. It remembered when this land was forest all the way to the water's edge, when there was no city here. It remembered the root-born walking openly in the world. It remembered the language of that time and everything that had changed since and in what order. And it had been waiting, not impatiently, the way water waits behind a dam, pressing against what contains it, with all the time in the world. I stood up from the bench, my first night back in Valor, 20 years away. Everyone who knew me as a child believed I was dead. The city was sitting on something ancient and patient and nearly awake. Advisor Drax had been signing natural settling reports for 12 years. The sky was the wrong color. And in a city of hundreds of thousands, I appeared to be the only one who had noticed any of it. Either I had skills that no one else here possessed, or the city had gotten very good at not noticing the things it didn't want to notice. Probably both. Cities learn that skill over time, not all at once. They learn to look away from what they don't want to understand. I went back to the copper nail, lay on the bed, put my hands flat on the cold floor and breathed the way Elder Sewell had taught me before opening to a place. And then I said, quietly, in root speech, in the old language, the language before forgetting, "I'm here. I came back. Tell me everything you remember." And the stone of Valor, all of it, every cobblestone and foundation block and buried wall from every version of this city that had stood here, started to speak. It takes a long time to hear what an entire city has to say. I didn't sleep. Sleep wasn't something I needed the way I used to anymore. One of the slower gifts from 20 years among beings who had no particular relationship with night, as a concept, or rest as a necessity. By the time the first gray light showed through my wall-facing window, I knew 3 things I hadn't known when I lay down on that floor. The first, the presence below Valor had a name. The stone knew it. The stone was reluctant, noticeably, actively reluctant, to say it. Stone doesn't scare easily. Stone has seen everything and held the memory of everything and processed it all with vast, indifferent capacity. The reluctance of the stone to name the thing below it was significant. More significant than any of the other things the stone had told me that night. The second, this wasn't the first time. The presence had tried to wake before. 3 separate times in Valor's recorded history, at least twice before. Each time, someone with root speech had felt it coming, found the place where the pressure was building, and had pressed it back down into quiet. The last time was 400 years ago. The stone remembered the woman who had done it, her name, the quality of her root speech, the feel of it. What the stone didn't remember was what had happened to her after. That part was simply absent, gone in a way that stone never forgets things on its own. Missing memories in stone are never accidental. Stone forgets nothing it's ever held. If something was absent, something had removed it deliberately. That gap bothered me more than anything else I learned that night. More than the name the stone was afraid to say. More than the failing seal. The third, there was a specific location, an old square in the Deep Market District, a place most people avoided without knowing they were doing it. But there was a fourth thing too, something the stone told me as the dawn was coming in, almost as an afterthought, almost like it had been waiting to see if I'd noticed it myself. There was someone else in Valor who could feel what I was feeling. Not as clearly, not with the same vocabulary for it, but feeling it nonetheless. The stone didn't know who. The stone can't identify people the way it identifies places. People move, and people's memory is internal rather than laid into the material they stand on. But it knew there was a presence in the city that listened, that went to the old places, that touched the old stones with attention that means something beyond ordinary curiosity. Someone who hadn't forgotten entirely what the old world had been. Someone who had kept some fragment of the knowledge that the rest of the city had let go of decade by decade. Whether that made them an ally or a complication was something I was going to have to figure out in person. Most things are. Giving it slightly more space than the street geometry required. Choosing other routes when routes of equal convenience would have taken them through it. The city had learned to flinch at that square without ever understanding why, without ever looking directly at what they were flinching at. The same district where Advisor Drax had filed a report about natural settling 6 months ago and signed his name to it without hesitation. I got up, washed my face, put on the second-hand coat, went downstairs to find breakfast. Ancient magic doesn't stop you needing food. Bad decisions come hungry. The market was already loud. The energy of a city that doesn't know it's sitting on a waking catastrophe has its own specific and insistent quality, busy, distracted, almost aggressive in how normal it insists on being, like a person who talks very fast because something is following them. I got porridge from a stall near the canal bridge and ate it, standing up, watching the crowd, the way the Rootborn had taught me to watch things. Not at people directly, at the space around them, at what they're not quite doing, at the gaps, at where feet hesitate before they're supposed to. And Valor had one gap. In a city this packed with movement, one direction that nobody walked, without a hesitation they didn't notice themselves making. Southwest, toward the deep market, toward the old square that the stone had described in careful, reluctant detail through the long night. It wasn't dramatic. Nobody turned back or crossed the street. Nobody was visibly uncomfortable or seemed to know why Southwest felt worse today. But there was a flinch in it, a micro-adjustment, a wrongness in how the feet moved in that direction, if you were specifically watching for it. An entire city's worth of people, each alone in the private feeling that Southwest felt slightly worse than every other direction this morning, with no idea that hundreds of thousands of others felt the exact same thing at the exact same location every single day for the exact same reason. That's how old the thing underneath was. It had been breathing on the underside of consciousness long enough for an entire city to learn to flinch. Before they ever understood there was anything there to flinch at, before anyone had asked why, before anyone had thought to look. I finished the porridge, put the bowl down, turned southwest, and walked toward the thing everyone in Valor had spent their lives quietly not looking at. The Deep Market District was the kind of old that doesn't get called charming, not preserved old, worked through old, built and repaired without ever being renewed. 3 centuries ago it had been the heart of Valor's trade. Then the harbor expanded northward and pulled the commercial energy with it. And the Deep Market had gradually become something more irregular. Small workshops, repair services, businesses that needed low rents more than prestige. The streets were narrower. The canal running through the district was smaller and older. The embankments rebuilt so many times the original was barely visible. I found the square easily because the stone had given me precise directions and because the feeling in my feet changed the moment I stepped into the right street. It was not a large square, an open space at the intersection of 3 streets, a disused well at one end, benches with nobody sitting on them. The center was paved with stones noticeably older than everything around them, darker, smoother from age rather than use, laid in a slightly off grid, placed before the city had standardized its geometry, before Valor had decided what shape it was going to permanently be. I stood at the entrance to the square and looked at it for a long moment. Then I put my foot on the first of the old center stones. The stone nearly spoke out loud. Root speech can project, in strong enough cases, into the edge of audibility. What came through my foot wasn't quite sound, but wasn't quite not sound either. Old, frightened, holding something down with the total sustained effort of 400 years of holding. Holding something that had been pushing back the entire time. Not urgently, patiently, with the pressure of something that understood it, had time. I stood there for 3 minutes with my foot on that stone, breathing, listening, learning the exact shape of what was below. Then I stepped back, looked at the center of the square with both sets of eyes simultaneously. The double vision that took Elder Sewell 4 years to teach me. The ordinary view. Old stones, a disused well, benches with nobody on them, morning light coming in at an angle that made the paving almost look warm. The root speech view, a seal, placed 400 years ago by someone who knew exactly what they were doing and had done it at considerable personal cost. Built into the stone itself, woven from the old language in the old way, designed to hold the thing below and keep it from reaching the surface. A structure that was eroding, not quickly, not dramatically, but consistently and steadily, the way everything erodes when no one renews the work. 400 years. It had held for 400 years, and now it was running out of the time it had been given, and there was no one to renew it. I stood at the edge of the square and thought about all of it. Elder Soul's words. Drax and 12 years of one conclusion. The gap in the stone's memory. The guardwoman with the quick brown eyes who'd called Kai Ash a ghost's name without looking away, and without running from the interesting thing. I had 2 weeks, maybe 3 if I was generous with the estimate. When the seal failed, whatever was below it would remember that it existed and that it was time. I needed to understand what it was. The stone had been afraid to say its name, which was itself a bad sign that I didn't know how to read yet. I needed to understand what Drax had been doing for 12 years and whether he knew what he was covering. Different answers required different responses. I needed to find out if anyone in this city still had knowledge of the old sealing techniques, or if that knowledge had been lost in the same 4 centuries. And I needed to do all of this quickly, in a city where I was legally dead, with no money left, no authority of any kind, and no allies yet. This was fine. I had 20 years of training from ancient, immortal forest spirits. I spoke the oldest language in the world. I could hear what stone remembered. I just needed a plan, and probably more porridge. Porridge is underrated as a foundation for serious plans in difficult situations. I turned away from the square, started walking back toward the market district, and then I noticed something I wouldn't have caught without specific training. Someone was watching the square, had been there before I arrived. Not watching me. They hadn't reacted when I'd stepped onto the old stone at all. They were watching the square itself, with the patient, regular attention of someone responsible for a thing. A caretaker's check, a note of current condition. Someone in Valor knew about that square, knew enough to watch it regularly, knew enough to visit it at dawn and stand at a careful distance and look. Not Drax. The watcher had been there before dawn, not filing reports from a council office. Someone else, with different knowledge and different reasons, with enough discretion to do it quietly without making it obvious, which meant they'd been doing it for long enough to have developed a method for it. I waited around the corner long enough to be sure they weren't moving on immediately. Then I stepped back out and looked at them properly. They were older than I'd expected from the quality of their attention. A woman, somewhere past 60, wearing a dark coat that said she'd learned not to be noticed. Standing at the edge of the square, just as I had, not on the old stones, carefully not on them. At the perimeter, looking in with the expression of someone reading a document for the 100th time. Checking for changes, looking for what had shifted since the last visit. The kind of look that has a long history and a long anxiety behind it. The stone of the street remembered her. She came here once a week. Had for years. Always at this hour, always the same careful circuit around the edge of the square. The stone also remembered that she talked to it sometimes, not to anyone else, to the square itself. In words I couldn't quite catch from the memory, but the posture was clear enough. She was the kind of person who talked to old things because old things listen. She had either some rough version of root speech, nearly lost in the human world, or she had something older and rougher, inherited knowledge, passed down through people who remembered without understanding what they were remembering. Either way, she knew this square mattered. She'd been watching it for years while Advisor Drax filed his natural settling reports and nobody else looked at the deep market twice. I wanted to talk to her, but not here. Not in a way that made her feel cornered in a place she'd clearly been treating as private for a very long time. Later. I'd find her later. Her habits were regular enough. Later, with better information, with a better sense of what questions to ask and what I was walking into. Because if she knew about the square, she might know other things. About the woman who had placed the seal 400 years ago. About what had happened to her after. About the gap in the stone's memory that bothered me more than anything else I'd learned in 12 hours back in Valor. I turned away from the deep market, walked back toward the main streets, already running the next steps, planning the order in which to do things when you have 2 weeks and nothing else. 2 weeks? Probably less. Let's get to work then. I had no more time to spend standing at the edge of things and thinking about them. If you want to know who was watching that square, and I promise you, when I found out, it changed everything I thought I understood about Valor. Stay right here for part 2. Drop a comment telling me what you think is under that square. And if this is your first time here, the subscribe button is right there. Her name was Maren Voss. I found that out about 3 hours after I'd first seen her watching the Deep Market Square. Reasonable time to learn a stranger's name when you're legally dead. I followed her at a distance, not dramatically, not ducking behind pillars, just walking the same direction with a gap that suggested coincidence rather than intent. Maren moved the way very old people move when they've stopped pretending they're not old, deliberately, every step chosen, but nothing slow about her attention. She took 4 different routes back from the Deep Market, none of them direct. Each change of direction was small enough to look like preference rather than caution. Someone who walked like that had been watched before, had learned at some point that a straight line home was an invitation. She was good at this, better than someone her age should need to be. I kept my distance and let the stone tell me about her as I walked on it. The cobblestones in the older parts of the city held long memories. They remembered Marin well. She'd been walking these streets for decades. The stone knew her footfall, the slight weight on the left heel, the pause at Alderman's Row that had been consistent for 30 years. The stone also remembered that she'd been followed before, more than once. Not always by someone with patience. She'd developed a method for dealing with that. Multiple routes, no straight lines. I stopped following her when she turned into a residential street near the old Weavers district. I noted the street, the building, the dark brick and neglected window boxes, filed it all, walked on. I'd come back. But I'd come back prepared, which meant I needed to do something useful first, something besides following old women and noting what cobblestones remembered about them. The city had an archive, not the Hall of Records. That was for official documents and people who were supposed to be here. The archive was different, older, less official. Vaylor's archive was run by a succession of archivists who took the preservation of the city's history more seriously than the city's government ever had. 300 years old. The current archivist was a man named Paul Vester. I walked in and found him behind a desk that had been slowly accumulating paper for what looked like several consecutive decades. He looked like a document himself, the specific look of someone who's spent enough time surrounded by old things that the old things have started to rub off on them. He looked up when I came in, assessed me quickly, made some calculation about what kind of person walked into an archive on a Tuesday afternoon with that particular expression. "Can I help you?" he said. Not unwelcoming, just efficient. The voice of someone who'd answered that question thousands of times and had learned to make it genuinely mean. "What do you need?" "I need historical records of the Deep Market District," I said. "Specifically anything predating the current layout. Anything about what was there before the commercial buildings went up." He looked at me for a moment. Archivists hear enough unusual questions that the unusual stops registering, which means when something catches their attention, it catches it hard. This caught his. He put down what he'd been doing, gave me his full focus. "How far back?" he said. "As far as you have," I said. He nodded slowly, the nod of someone who'd just decided to take something seriously. He got up and led me into the back rooms. The archive's older materials were organized in a way that made the Hall of Records look systematic. But Paul Vester knew exactly where everything was, and that is the only organizational system that actually matters when you need to find something. He pulled 3 boxes and a rolled document he handled with the care of something irreplaceable, spread it out on the reading table, stepped back to let me look. The document was a map, pre-city, earlier than any Vaylor I'd learned about in my years before disappearing, the kind that predated the decision to call this place Vaylor at all. The Deep Market Square was on it, marked differently than everything around it, not as a space, not as a building, but as a point, a specific location, marked with a symbol. Root speech. An old character older than the simplified version Elder Sewell had taught me, but recognizably the same lineage. The character meant here. Specifically, here is where the weight is. I didn't let anything show on my face. I looked at the map like someone who found it professionally interesting. Paul Vester was watching me from the side with the expression of someone who had waited a long time to see what a person who understood this map would do with it. "What does this symbol mean?" I asked, pointing to it, testing whether he knew. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "It appears in several old documents from that period. No definitive translation. Some scholars think it marks locations of significance to the pre-settlement population," he said. He paused, then added something I hadn't expected. Then added, with the precise care of someone choosing words, "There are 6 of them in the city. I've mapped them all. 6 locations." I kept my expression neutral. 6 places in Vaylor marked with the root speech character for "here is where the weight is." Not just the Deep Market, across the whole city. "Can I see where the others are?" I said. He spread a second document beside the first, a much more recent map. Vaylor as it currently stood. 6 points marked in red ink, his own hand, recent marks. He'd been building this for a while. The marks had the look of a long-term project. Systematic, deliberate, rather than anything casual or accidental. Someone who'd spent time systematically locating something he didn't understand but knew mattered. I looked at the 6 points, tried to read the pattern. The Deep Market was one. The others distributed across the city, not randomly, but in a way suggesting a structure I couldn't see from 2 dimensions. "Tell me about the others," I said. "What's there now?" "A market, well, that's been sealed for decades," he said. "An old foundation in the construction district they keep building over. Each time they build there," he said, "the structure develops problems within a few years. They've tried 3 times. They've stopped trying." He pointed to a third, the base of the old harbor lighthouse. The original foundation is still there. They built the new lighthouse around it rather than replacing it. The engineers who replaced the lighthouse found they couldn't bring themselves to remove the original foundation. None of them could explain why. They built around it instead. A private garden in the upper city, he said. Owned by the Counselors Association. Very restricted access. They say it's for security reasons. He paused. I've always thought that was an interesting choice of explanation for a garden, he said. Security is usually about people. This felt like it was about something else. The fifth is in the basement of the Hall of Records. A room that's been sealed, officially for the preservation of sensitive materials. I've filed 3 separate requests to access that room over the years, all 3 denied. Different reasons each time, but always by the same office. And the 6th, I said. He was quiet for a beat, long enough to tell me this was the one he'd been thinking about most. Under the council chambers, he said, the old section, pre-renovation. I looked at the map. 6 points. 6 marks with the old root speech character, distributed across a city built on top of something that had been deliberately placed before the city existed. Not 1 seal, I thought. 6. The woman 400 years ago hadn't just placed 1 seal in the deep market. She'd placed 6 of them. A structure, a network, a whole diagram in the bedrock. And the deep market seal was the most visible, the most accessible, the most eroded. The others might be in better condition, or they might be worse in ways I couldn't yet measure. I said thank you and walked out of the archive into the afternoon with considerably more to think about than I'd had when I walked in. 6 seals, not 1. The geometry of everything changed. If all 6 were failing, the timeline was different. The pressure wasn't building at one point. It was building across the whole structure. When one gave way, the others would follow faster. And if one of those 6 was under the council chambers, under the building where Drax worked, then his 17 natural settling reports took on a very different character. You either didn't know what was below you, in which case the reports were just negligence, or you did know, and in that case, your choices for 12 years looked like something very different. You either didn't know you were sitting on something like that, or you did. And if you did, 17 natural settling reports took on a very different character than careless bureaucracy. I needed to talk to the guard woman, and I was starting to think I needed to do it today, because tomorrow was already going to be more complicated, and today was complicated enough. I found Lena Saar at the second canal crossing. She was on her route, and I waited for her, which she noticed from 30 feet out. She adjusted her direction slightly and came directly toward me. You followed me yesterday, she said. Not an accusation, more like establishing a shared fact so we could move past it to the interesting part. I didn't follow you, I said. I walked in the same direction you were walking. She looked at me with an expression that measured how much patience to extend to semantic distinctions. Moderate amount. My name is Lena Saar, she said. 3rd District Patrol. You told me your name yesterday. So we're even, or we're not, depending on whether yours was real. It was real, I said. Kai Ash. Real in 1398 when I was born, and real now, and the fact that the city thinks I've been dead for 20 years doesn't change either of those things. The quick brown eyes did their work, running across my face, cataloging what they could read there, filing it next to the name and the 20 years and the forest and the sky she'd seen me reading. You were looking at the sky, she said. When I walked into you. You were looking up like you were reading it. The sky above Valor is the wrong color, I said. Has been for a while, at least a year. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said something I hadn't expected to hear from anyone in this city. I know, she said, just that. Those 2 words stopped me completely. I've been noticing it for 8 months, she said. I tried to report it. I wrote it up as an anomalous atmospheric condition and submitted it through standard channels. It was returned below threshold. Who signed the returned note, I said. Advisor Drax, she said. Office of the City Council. Of course it was Drax. Of course it was. The man with 17 natural settling reports was also returning atmospheric anomaly reports as below threshold. How long have you been on 3rd District, I said. 4 years, she said. I asked for it specifically. The deep market is in 3rd District. I wanted to watch the deep market. Why, I said. She met my eyes. Because it bothers me, she said simply. Every time I walk through that old square, I feel like something is looking at me from below. It is, I said. She took a breath, nodded. The specific nod of someone who'd known the answer to that question for 4 years and had been waiting for someone to say it out loud so she could stop carrying it alone. I'm going to need your help, I said. Not right now, but in the next 2 weeks I'm going to need someone who knows the streets, the guard routes, who Drax talks to and when. She looked at me for a long moment. What are you? She said. Not who. What? That was a better question than I usually got from strangers. I was raised by the spirits of the sacred forest for 20 years, I said. I came back because something below this city is waking up in approximately 2 weeks, and I appear to be the only person left in the world who knows how to stop it, I said. She looked at me, long and steadily with those quick brown eyes doing their work. I came back because there's something below this city waking up in approximately 2 weeks, and I appear to be the only person who knows how to stop it. She looked at me, long and steadily. Then she said, "Okay, what do you need first? I need to know who accesses the council chamber's old section, the pre-renovation basement, and I need to know if Drax has any unusual habits. After-hours visits to the Hall of Records, trips to old parts of the city." She nodded. "I can find that out without making it obvious I'm looking." She paused. "There's something else you should know. 3 days ago," she said, "there was an incident near the harbor lighthouse. A maintenance worker went down into the old foundation and came back different. His exact word in the report was different. He said it didn't feel threatening. It felt like something had just noticed him and was deciding what to do about it. 3 days ago, at the harbor lighthouse, at the site of one of the 6 points Paul Vester had marked on his map. 6 months after Drax's most recent natural settling report. Something hadn't just been waking up under the deep market. Something had been testing the network, pressing at the different points, checking what was still holding and what was giving way. It was moving faster than I'd thought. 2 weeks was optimistic. I revised the estimate downward and didn't say so out loud. "I need to find a woman named Marin Voss," I said, "near the old Weavers District. Dark brick buildings, 60s, dark coat, moves like someone who's been watched before. Do you know her?" Lena thought for a moment. "Old Marin," she said. "She's known in the deep market area. The market people check on her. She's been around longer than anyone can account for." "Does she have any connection to Drax?" I said. "Not that I know of," Lena said. "Actually, the opposite. She barely exists in the official record. That takes deliberate effort over a long time." "I'll be at the Copper Nail tonight," I told her. "If you find anything before then, come find me. Tomorrow morning at the canal bridge, earlier side of dawn, if not." She nodded. "Then, the sky really is wrong, isn't it? Not a little off. Not atmospheric conditions." "Yes," I said. "Something below is pulling at the quality of the light. It's been doing it long enough the city has adjusted." She looked at the sky briefly, then back at me. "Don't get killed before you fix this," she said, and walked on. I liked Lena Saar. 4 years watching the deep market because it bothered her. 8 months of noticing the wrong sky. A report filed knowing it would be returned. She did it anyway. She did it anyway. To put her name next to the observation. To make it part of the record in a city that was very carefully managing its record. That was the instinct you needed in a situation like this. Observe. Record. Name it. Even when no one was going to do anything with it. Even when Drax was going to send it back below threshold. I went to find Marin Voss. The Weavers District wasn't far from the canal crossing where I'd spoken with Lena, which I noted as potentially useful later. The narrow Weavers District street was quiet in the late afternoon. The kind of residential quiet where strangers are visible from the moment they enter. I was visible from the moment I entered. I knocked on the dark brick building with the neglected window boxes and waited. The street was quiet. Someone watched me from a window across the way. She took a long time, long enough that I'd have thought she wasn't home if the step I was standing on hadn't remembered her coming in and not going out again. When she opened the door, she looked at me without surprise, like she'd been expecting me, or something like me, for a very long time, long enough that surprise had given up and gone home. "You came out of the forest," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," I said. She opened the door wider. "Come in," she said. "I've been waiting for this conversation for approximately 30 years, she said, "and I would very much like to have it sitting down if you don't mind." The inside of Marin Voss's apartment was what happened when someone with deep knowledge of old things spent decades accumulating materials related to those things and had run out of places to put them. Books, papers, objects I recognized and objects I didn't. Drawings of things I'd seen in root-borne memory spaces, old maps. And, on the wall above the main desk, drawn in charcoal, a diagram I recognized immediately. It was the 6-point structure, the 6 seals. She'd mapped them too, except hers had more. Lines connecting the 6 points, annotations in a hand, so small and dense it would take an hour to read fully. She had years of work on that wall, decades of work, and she'd done it alone, which meant she was either very dedicated or very stubborn, or most likely both. There were other things on the wall too. Transcriptions of old documents I recognized from the Rootborn archives. Translations of root speech characters in a hand that had clearly learned the language from books rather than from a speaker. Close. Impressive for someone who'd never had a teacher. But with the specific gaps that always appeared when language was learned without a living context to learn it in. She'd gotten the grammar right and missed some of the register. Close, but not quite. The difference between learning a language from books and learning it from someone who uses it to talk to stone. I looked at the transcriptions for a long moment. She'd spent years translating documents that she only partially understood, building a picture of something she couldn't quite see, and she'd gotten more right than wrong. which was remarkable, which suggested either exceptional intellect or exceptional stubbornness, and I was starting to think both were accurate. "I know what you're looking at," she said from behind me. She was making tea with the focused efficiency of someone who'd had important conversations over tea before. "I know you know," I said. I sat in the chair she'd indicated, the one positioned so that a visitor arriving would see the diagram on the wall before anything else. Deliberate arrangement. She came and sat across from me, looked at my face, then at my hands, specifically at my hands with the attention of someone reading something in them. "You have the speech," she said, "the real one." "Elder Sewell taught me," I said, "for 20 years. She nodded. "She knows about this then," she said, "about how much time is left." "She sent me back," I said. She said, "Patience ends." Maren Voss looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, "I'm the last of the Watchers. There used to be more of us. People who maintained the documentation and watched for the signs. There used to be more. People who knew about the seals, who maintained the documentation, who watched for the signs. Now it's just me." "How long?" I asked. 40 years, she said quietly. "I'm the last one for 40 years. The others died or moved or forgot, and I've been watching 6 squares and 6 foundations in this city by myself ever since, because what else was I going to do? There was no one else to do it. There was no self-pity in it, just a statement. Someone who'd made a decision and lived inside it for 40 years and made peace with the dimensions of that choice." "You know about all 6, I said. "All 6, she confirmed. "The deep market seal is the most eroded, closest to the original pressure point, so it's taken the most stress, but 2 of the others are in worse shape than people know." "Which 2? I said. "The Harbor Lighthouse Foundation," she said, "and the one under the council chambers. The 2 locations that would be most difficult to access and most critical to the sequence." Of course, it was those 2. The lighthouse where the maintenance worker had come back 3 days ago with that single inadequate word. Different. And the council chambers. And the council chambers where Advisor Drax worked, where he signed 17 natural settling reports, where someone had been making themselves comfortable for a very long time. "Tell me about the council chamber seal," I said, specifically. "When did you last check it?" She was quiet for a moment. Then, "I can't access it. I haven't been able to for 6 years. Someone put a lock on that section of the basement," she said. "Not the kind of lock the council put there for access restriction. A different kind." She met my eyes. "The kind that uses old language. The same language the seals are made of," she said. "Someone used root speech to seal the room that contains the seal. I can feel it from outside the building, but I can't get in. Someone had used root speech to lock a room containing one of the 6 seals, in the building where Drax worked 6 years ago, around the same time when Advisor Drax had adopted natural settling as his standard answer for everything in the deep market and surrounding districts. I sat with that for a long time. The tea was getting cold. "Maren," I said, "what happens if all 6 seals fail at once? Not one at a time, the full structure coming apart simultaneously." She looked at me with the look of someone who has thought about that question many times and has not enjoyed any of the answers. "It's not just what's below that gets released," she said. "The seals aren't just a lid," she said. "They're a structure. They hold things in a particular configuration. If they fail in the right sequence, the thing below doesn't just wake up, it restructures." She stood up and went to the wall, traced the lines connecting the 6 points without touching the drawing. "The 6 points are the corners of something," she said. "A diagram drawn into the bedrock. When all 6 fail," she said, "and the structure collapses in the right order, it doesn't release what's below, it releases the drawing itself. The diagram becomes real, becomes active, becomes complete at last, after 400 years of suspension and waiting, and the slow patient work of something that understood it had time. And whatever drew it 400 years ago doesn't need to come up from below," she said. "It's already here. It's been here the whole time. The seals aren't keeping something out. They're keeping something from remembering." The room was very quiet. Outside, Valor was doing its evening. Lanterns coming on. Canal sounds. The completely ordinary noise of a city with no idea. I thought about Elder Sewell's words. Older than the city. Older than the families who built it. Older than the wall they put between themselves and the forest. I thought about the diagram. The 6 points. What it would look like if those lines were drawn in bedrock rather than charcoal. About what it meant that someone had used the old language to seal a room in the council chamber 6 years ago. About what that action implied about their knowledge and their plans. Something below wasn't waiting to wake up, I thought. Something below was already awake, had been awake, was simply arranging conditions for a particular moment. Patient, deliberate, and someone in Valor was helping, not helplessly, not out of ignorance, with knowledge, with deliberate use of old language, locking rooms, managing schedules, keeping the reports comfortable. Someone was running the clock deliberately, managing the sequence, timing the failure of each seal, and the clock they were managing was running out of time to be managed. I need to get into the council chambers, I said. Marin looked at me. I know, she said. I've been thinking about how to do that for 6 years. You can't do it from outside. The lock is anchored to something inside that room, she said. I can feel the anchor from outside, but I can't reach it. You need to be inside to break it. Who has access to the pre-renovation basement, I said. The council, she said, certain senior advisors, and whoever put the lock there in the first place. There it was. Advisor Drax, I said. Or someone working with him, she said carefully. I don't know it's Drax, specifically. I only know that someone with the old language has been managing that room. But someone who can use the old language has been managing the council chamber seal for 6 years, and that specific combination of knowledge and access is not something many people have. She looked at me steadily. And managing it very carefully, she said. Not to prevent what's below from waking, to time it, to make sure it happens in a particular order at a particular moment. She set down her tea without drinking it, and I know, she said, that the moment they've been working toward is approximately 11 days from now, because that's when the alignment completes. What alignment? I said. She went to one of the piles near the window and came back with an astronomical record, the kind that tracked movement and configuration rather than weather. Every 400 years, she said, there's a specific configuration, a set of conditions occurring for approximately 72 hours and not occurring again for another 4 centuries. The woman who placed the seals placed them in response to this configuration, occurring 400 years ago. She stopped what was being prepared for that moment and put 6 seals in the ground to hold the whole structure in a state of suspended preparation, buying time, as much of it as she could. And now the configuration is coming around again, Marin said. 11 days, 72 hours in which the conditions are right for what was started 400 years ago to be completed. Someone has been maintaining those seals in a specific state of controlled decay, she said, not preventing them from failing, timing the failure, making sure each seal gives way at exactly the right moment, in exactly the right sequence, so that when the configuration arrives, the diagram in the bedrock activates correctly. So that when the configuration arrives, she said, the seals fail in the correct sequence and the diagram becomes active. And what has been waiting inside this city's structure for 400 years completes what it started, at last, on schedule. I sat with all of that for a very long time. Outside, the evening was deepening, lanterns burning cheap and fast. The sky still the wrong color, pulling the light downward from below. Not a symptom, I thought. A sign. The thing inside the city's structure was already active enough to affect the quality of the light. Had been active for at least a year. 11 days, I said. 11 days, Marin confirmed. And I have spent 40 years hoping someone would come out of that forest and know what to do, because I certainly don't. I asked her about the first time she'd realized what the square meant. She was quiet for a moment. Then she told me. She'd been 16. Her grandmother had taken her to the deep market on a specific errand that, in hindsight, hadn't been an errand at all. Her grandmother had stood at the edge of the square and put her hand on Marin's shoulder. She hadn't gone onto the old stones. She'd been careful about that. She knew about the stones. Remember this, her grandmother had said. Remember this place. Remember how it feels. Someday someone is going to need you to tell them what you know about it. Then she'd taken Marin home and made soup and never spoken about it again, as if the visit had been an ordinary errand that was simply done and didn't need discussing further. She died 3 years later without explaining herself any further, in the specific way that people who carry important things sometimes die before they get around to passing them properly. Marin had spent 40 years being the person who was supposed to remember. She'd built an entire practice around it. The wall, the maps, the translations in half-understood root speech, the weekly visits to 6 squares across the city regardless of weather or season or how tired she was, because her grandmother had said remember, and so she had remembered, with everything she had, with her whole life organized around it, for 40 years. Keep remembering until someone arrived who could use what she'd stored. That had been the task. She had done it completely, without acknowledgement, without certainty anyone was coming. I thought about Elder Sewell, about the way she'd spoken to me when I was 5 years old. You are not lost, small one. You are early. I thought about patience, about what it looked like across very different lifespans. Marin Voss, I thought, had done something genuinely remarkable. Not dramatic, not powerful, just sustained, just consistent. Just 40 years of showing up to squares in the city and looking at them carefully and going home and writing things down. The kind of thing that doesn't look heroic until you understand that everything depends on someone having done it. She looked at me with the expression of someone who has been carrying something for 40 years and has just set it down. Complicated expression. Relief and exhaustion and something close to gratitude. Or close to what gratitude looks like in someone who has been waiting 40 years. To finally be able to hand something to someone who might actually know what to do with it. That's what the expression said. I understood it completely. I know what to do, I said, parts of it. I need to understand the structure better, and I need access to the council chamber's basement. I need to read the lock. You said you could feel it from outside. Could you renew the seals, she said. If you could reach them in time, if the access problem could be solved. I know the technique, I said. Elder Sewell made sure of that. Renewing them isn't enough, I said. Elder Sewell trained me for something more permanent than renewal, I believe, though she was characteristically indirect about what that something was. 20 years in the forest with teachers who didn't waste lessons on things you wouldn't eventually need. Everything she taught me pointed somewhere. I'm standing in that somewhere now. But, she said. She heard the but before I said it. Renewing them isn't enough, I said. They've been failing for a reason. The same reason they'll fail again in 400 years, if that's all we do. The thing has been building toward this for too long. Renewal buys time. It doesn't solve the problem. What's the alternative, she said. I need to find the name, I said. The one the stone was afraid to say. If I know the name, I can address it directly. Not contain it. Actually address it. She was very still. Then, that's the part I don't have, she said. The original Watchers held it. The name was the most protected piece of knowledge, held by one person at a time, never written. And 40 years ago, she said, the last Watcher died before passing it on. Without warning, without preparation, without the single conversation that would have changed everything. And I've been watching 6 squares in the city alone for 40 years, without the single most important piece of knowledge the Watchers were supposed to protect. The stone knows it, I said. The stone below the deep market knows the name. It's afraid to say it, which means someone used it recently enough that the stone is still processing what happened. Someone used the name, Marin said slowly, to do something with it, to anchor the lock, to complete some step in the sequence. Yes, I said. And if I can get into that room and read the lock, I can get the name from it. The room in the council chamber's basement, the one that's been sealed with root speech for 6 years, read the anchor, get the name, then address what's below directly. Marin was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something that might have been a prayer in a language I didn't recognize, or might just have been a very old woman expressing relief in her own way. Can you get me into the council chambers? I said. Not directly, she said, but there's someone who can. She paused. It will cost you something, not money, something else. What? I said. Your true name, she said. Not Kai Ash. The name the spirits gave you, the one you were given in the forest after the first year. The one that isn't a human name. I looked at her for a moment. Elder Sewell had told me that name was mine to give or not give, that it carried weight, that giving it freely was an act of trust that couldn't be undone. How do you know I have one? I said. Because the Rootborn always give them, she said, to anyone they train longer than a season. Always. It's in the oldest records. It's how you establish that someone who comes out of that forest is who they say they are and was trained by whom they say trained them. The name carries the proof of it. It's how I know you are what you say you are, she said. Not because I doubt you, because whoever can get you into the council chambers will doubt you, and the name is how I vouch for you to them. I thought about it, about what Elder Sewell had said, about the weight of trust in a city where I knew almost no one and had 11 days to do something that required people to believe me. Then I said it, the name the forest had given me in the year I turned 9, when Elder Sewell decided I was staying long enough to deserve one. The name in the old language that meant something specific about who I was and what I was being sent back to do, in the particular idiom of beings who didn't waste words even when naming people. Marin Voss heard it. Her face changed in a way I hadn't expected. Something moved through it that wasn't quite recognition, but was close to it, like hearing music you'd only ever read about. I'll make the introduction tomorrow morning, she said. Come back here before dawn. I will, I said. Then, who else knows about the 11 days? Who else has figured out the timeline? She met my eyes. That, she said, is exactly the right question to be asking. And I think you already have a theory about the answer. I did have a theory. Advisor Drax, 17 natural settling reports. 1 returned atmospheric anomaly report. 6 years of silence on the council chamber's basement. Someone who could use root speech. Someone who knew about the astronomical configuration. Who had spent years arranging conditions for it to land correctly. Who had a very specific idea about what should happen in 11 days. But I hadn't asked the question that would change everything about how I approached the next 11 days depending on the answer. Was Drax trying to make it happen? Or was he trying to stop it? I walked back to the Coppernail through the evening streets. Cheap lanterns, wrong-colored sky. The stone remembering everything and saying nothing I hadn't already asked it. I had 11 days, 1 guard with the right instincts, 1 old woman with 40 years of watching and a wall full of notes, 1 archivist who mapped things he didn't understand, and 1 name I hadn't given to anyone in 20 years. and whatever the forest had put into me during 20 years of education that Elder Sewell had only partially described. She'd said I would understand it better in use than in explanation. I was starting to think she'd been right about that. I was understanding things in use I definitely hadn't understood before. I went to sleep earlier than I usually would. I had a feeling the next 11 days were going to require me to be as functional as possible, as consistently as possible. Sleep was still something I could choose to take when I needed it, and tonight I needed it, and I was going to take it before the next 11 days made that choice for me. Before I put my hands from the floor and stopped listening, I said one more thing to the stone in the old language. I know you're afraid to say the name. I know something happened when it was said. I'm going to find out what. I'm going to come back and ask you again. And this time, I'm going to be ready for the answer. The stone didn't reply the way people do, but it shifted slightly, with the quality of something that had been holding tension for a very long time and had just decided, maybe, to trust that the tension had somewhere to go. 11 days. 11 days to get the name, fix the seals, find out what Drax was actually doing, and deal with whatever was already awake in the structure below the city's foundations. I thought about the diagram on Marin's wall. The 6 points and the lines between them, the shape it made when you connected them wasn't random. It had a logic to it that I'd felt rather than seen in the moment of looking at it. Elder Sewell had taught me that ancient structures weren't arbitrary, that the people who built them, who did the building centuries ago, in the language of the world before forgetting, built them with intention that went all the way down. 6 seals in those specific locations wasn't just 6 seals. 6 seals connected in that pattern made something larger than the sum of the individual parts, a shape, a structure. 6 seals in those particular locations, connected by those particular lines, made a shape that I needed to understand more fully before I knew what renewing them would actually mean. Because here was the thing that I hadn't said to Marin yet, the thing I'd been sitting with since she'd told me that renewing the seals wasn't enough. Renewing the seals would stop what was happening in 11 days. It would push the thing below back into suspension. It would buy 400 more years. But whatever had been started 400 years ago and stopped by the woman whose name the stone remembered, that thing would still be there, still in suspension, still waiting for the next time the configuration came around. 400 years, roughly the length of time Valor had been a city. The next time around, there might not be anyone watching 6 squares and translating old documents and waiting for someone to come out of the sacred forest. The next time around might not work out as well as this time. I needed the name, not just to address what was below right now. I needed it to do something more permanent. And I didn't yet know what more permanent actually looked like, or whether it was something the 20 years the Rootborn had given me had actually prepared me to do. But Elder Sewell had sent me back with 20 years of education for a reason. She had sent me back now rather than a decade from now for a reason. The timing was not accidental, which meant whatever I was supposed to do with those 20 years of education was supposed to happen in the next 11 days, and it was supposed to be more than just renewal. I lay on the bed, in the copper nail, and stared at the ceiling and thought about all the things I didn't yet know, letting them settle into the order they needed to be solved in, letting the next right thing become clear, get the name, understand the structure, then decide what to do about it, not in the abstract. Actually, tomorrow would tell me more. Tomorrow I'd meet whoever Marant was introducing me to. Tomorrow I'd get closer to the council chambers. Tomorrow would reduce the uncertainty and increase the clarity. And clarity, Elder Sewell had always said, was what you needed before you acted. Not certainty, you never got certainty. But clarity, a clear sight of what you were actually dealing with. That was achievable. That was what the next 11 days were for. Elder Sewell had always said that the right response to an impossible situation was the same as the response to any other situation. Do the next right thing, then the next, until you run out of next things. And if you run out of next things before you reach the end, at least you'd done each one correctly. That was all the comfort Elder Sewell ever offered. That was the most comfort she'd ever offered, and I'd learned to find it genuinely comforting, which probably said something about my years in the forest. Tomorrow, I was going to meet whoever Marin was introducing me to, get into the council chambers, read the lock, get the name, find out what Drax actually was. Villain, or something more complicated than villain, which in my experience is the more common and more dangerous kind of problem. In 11 days, something very old was going to remember it didn't need to wait, and I was going to be ready for it when it did. Or I was going to figure out, in 11 days, what ready needed to look like. Probably both. Most things are both. Stay with me for part 3. Drop a comment. Do you think Drax is running this, or trying to stop it? I want to know what you're thinking. I was back at Marin's door before the sky had finished deciding what color to be. The wrong color still. It would be that color for 11 more days, and then either everything was fixed, or it wasn't. It would be that color for 11 more days, and then either it would fix itself, or it wouldn't matter anymore. She answered immediately, which meant she'd been awake. She had the look of someone who'd spent the night doing the thing she always did when she couldn't sleep, which was probably work. There was fresh tea. There were new annotations on the wall. She'd been thinking about the diagram again, which I gathered she did most nights, had been doing most nights for 40 years. "Come in," she said. "He's already here." Said it the way you say something you've been waiting to say for a while, with the specific relief of a person who finally has enough pieces on the board. He was. Paul Vester, the archivist from the day before, was sitting in the chair I'd used with a cup of tea and the expression of a man who had known this morning was coming for longer than I had. "You two know each other," I said. It wasn't a question. "Marin has been bringing me old documents for 12 years, Paul said, and asking me questions about them that I couldn't answer but filed away. He looked at me. "Yesterday you asked about the pre-settlement map. You're the first person who's ever looked at that map and recognized the symbol." He paused. "Marin described you after your visit," he said. "I came to meet you, not because she asked me to, because you were the first person who'd ever looked at that map and recognized the symbol on it. He'd come to meet me, not because Marin had asked him to, because he'd been building his own picture for 12 years, and I was a new piece that fit somewhere important." "So there are 3 of us," I said. "4, Marin said, "if you count the guard woman." I raised an eyebrow. "She already sent word this morning," Marin said. "Early, about Drax." Lena Saar had sent word, early enough that it had arrived before dawn, which meant she'd been up most of the night too, which meant she'd found something she thought was urgent. "What did she say?" I asked. Marin handed me a folded note. Brief. The handwriting of someone who'd been trained to write legibly under pressure and had internalized the habit. Drax visited the Hall of Records at 3 a.m, went to the sealed basement room, was inside for 40 minutes, left before any of the overnight staff noticed. I was on late patrol. I saw him go in and I timed him. 40 minutes. He left before the overnight staff rotation. He clearly knew the schedule. I read it twice. Drax visited the room containing one of the 6 seals at 3 a.m. The room that was officially sealed for preservation of sensitive materials. The room he'd denied others access to. He had a key. He'd been there before, probably many times, at hours when nobody would see him, 40 minutes inside, then gone. That was not the behavior of someone who was managing a catastrophe for malicious reasons. That was the behavior of someone who was managing a catastrophe alone and quietly and with enormous care. It was also the behavior of someone who was frightened. You don't go at 3 a.m. unless you're frightened. You don't go alone unless there's no one you trust enough to bring. "I need to get into that room today," I said. "Not at 3 a.m, not on a schedule built around avoiding everyone. Today with people present who can understand what's in there." Paul Vester nodded. "That's why I came," he said. He pulled something from his coat pocket. A key. Old, but maintained. "I've had this for 8 years," he said. "It's a maintenance key. It opens the service access routes in the pre-renovation section," he said. "Routes that aren't on the main floor plans. Routes that have been part of the archive's maintenance agreement for 300 years, since the founding. Since whoever founded the archive decided that access to those specific locations was essential to its purpose." He looked at it for a moment. "I never used it because I didn't know what I was looking for, or what I'd do when I found it." He set it on the table between us. I think that was the wrong decision in retrospect. I picked up the key. It was heavier than it looked. The stone it touched remembered being used rarely and carefully. It remembered Paul's hands. It also remembered other hands, much older hands. The kind of weight a key accumulates when it has been passed deliberately from person to person across 3 centuries of careful custody. "How did you get this?" I said. "The archive has maintenance access agreements with several city buildings," Paul said. "The Hall of Records, the council chambers, others, for document preservation purposes." He paused. "The key came with the archive when I took over the position. I researched its history. The previous archivist had it. And the one before that? And the one before that, going all the way back to when the archive was founded 300 years ago. The key had passed through every archivist since the beginning, not casually, deliberately. Going back to about 400 years ago," I said. He nodded. "Around that time, yes. There was a founding document that I've never been able to fully interpret. It mentioned the maintenance agreements as essential, the founding archivist's word. Not useful, not important. Essential. As if the archive's real purpose, beneath the surface purpose of preserving documents, had always been to maintain access to these 6 locations until the moment that access was needed. The archivist who founded this institution 300 years ago had arranged maintenance access to specific buildings and called it essential, had passed the key down through every successor for 3 centuries. Someone 400 years ago had understood that access to those locations would be necessary again, had arranged for it, had set up a chain of custody that stretched from the woman who placed the seals all the way to a small archivist with a confused expression and a very old key. Elder Sewell had told me that patience was a form of planning, I was starting to understand what she meant in a way I hadn't before. "We go this morning," I said, "all three of us. Paul for the access. Maren because she's been the one watching the longest and she needs to see what's in that room. And me," I said, "because I'm the only one here who can read what's in that room. The only one with the full language. The only one who can get the name from the anchor of the oldest seal." They both nodded. No argument, no hesitation. The specific decisiveness of people who have been waiting a long time to do something useful. The service entrance to the council chamber's pre-renovation section was a narrow door on the building's north face that was designed to be unnoticed and had succeeded at this for several centuries. The morning was gray and damp, and the streets around the council building were quiet at this hour. We went in without incident. The key worked. The door swung open with the ease of something that had been maintained carefully, which meant someone had been oiling the hinges and keeping the frame from swelling. Someone who visited regularly. The pre-renovation section was everything old buildings were when they'd been kept structurally sound but left otherwise untouched. Stone that remembered a great deal. Air that moved in its own patterns, independent of the newer section. Older circulation routes. Older stone that remembered a time before the building above it existed. The specific atmosphere of a space that had been left alone long enough to develop its own character, its own quiet, its own accumulated memory. I walked with one hand trailing the wall, listening. The stone here was very old, older than the city above it, older than the council chambers that had been built on top of it. It remembered the original construction, the people who had placed the foundations, the intention behind the work, the specific care with which certain stones had been laid in certain positions, and the reason behind that care, not construction, but intention. Someone had placed these stones the way you place words. This had been a structure before it was a building. The council chambers had been built on top of something that was already a meaningful arrangement of stone. Someone had known that this was already a meaningful place, and had built the council chambers here deliberately, above it, keeping it beneath the seat of the city's government for 300 years. Or, I thought, someone had built here specifically because of what was already here, to keep an eye on it, to maintain proximity to it, to have access when access was needed. The door to the sealed room was at the end of a corridor that the rest of the building had apparently decided to forget about. The corridor wasn't on the official floor plans. Paul had checked before we came. He'd pulled the architectural records for the building, and this corridor existed nowhere in them. He'd pulled the architectural records, and the corridor simply wasn't there, which meant it predated the formal documentation. The door itself was unremarkable. Old wood, old iron fittings, the kind of door that had survived by being invisible rather than by being strong. And around the edges of the door, barely visible to anyone who wasn't specifically looking for it, tracing the grain of the old wood, lines. Old root speech drawn in something that had absorbed into the wood over the years, until it was nearly part of the grain, precise, deliberate. The work of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. "This is it," Maren said quietly. "This is what I could feel from outside the building." She looked at me. "Can you read it?" "Yes," I said. "This is it." I put my hand flat on the door and listened to what the wood and the iron and the old stone of the frame had been holding for 6 years. The lock was old. The root speech woven into it was 6 years old, recent enough that I could feel the hand that had placed it clearly, the specific quality of it, the intentions behind it. And beneath the 6-year-old layer there was something else, much older. The original lock, placed by the original hand, in the original language, 400 years ago and perfectly intact, placed at the same time as the seals themselves by the same hand, by the woman whose name the stone had been afraid to say. 2 locks, one ancient, one recent. The recent one placed over the ancient one, not to replace it, but to reinforce it. Someone 6 years ago had found this door and found the ancient lock and added their own, not to hide what was inside, to protect it, to add a second barrier against the wrong hands finding what the original lock was already protecting, with less than perfect technique, but genuine care. I understood something then. The person who had placed the second lock had been trying to protect the seal, not conceal it. I pressed harder, let the root speech flow the way Elder Sewell had taught me, not forcing, just opening. The way you open a conversation with stone, respectfully, with patience. The ancient lock responded first. It recognized the language I was speaking. It recognized the specific register of it, which could only come from a long training in the living tradition. It relaxed. The newer lock was different, more recent, more cautious. But it was built on the same principles as the old one, which meant it responded to the same approach, just more slowly, just with more tension in it. The specific quality of something built by someone who was afraid and working fast and doing the best they could with what they had and the time they had to use it. Both locks released. The door swung inward. The air that came out was old in the specific way that sealed places hold age, concentrated, undisturbed, carrying the accumulated quiet of years. We went in. The three of us, in single file, into a room that had been sealed and quiet and holding something important for 6 years, while the city went about its business above it. The room was small, smaller than I'd expected, the kind of room that had been built with a specific purpose and had never needed to be larger than that purpose required. In the center of the floor, a circle of stones sat apart from everything around them. Older than the building, older than the corridor, older than most of what I'd touched in this city. The same kind of old stone as in the Deep Market Square. Darker, smoother from age, laid in a pattern that didn't match the rest of the floor. And around those old stones, drawn in the same material as the lock on the door, a seal. Complex, layered, much more sophisticated than what I'd seen at the Deep Market Square. This one had been worked on, not 400 years ago, recently, within the last 6 years. New root speech laid over the ancient structure, careful and imperfect and genuine. Someone had added to it, carefully, precisely, in the same language, but with newer hands, reinforcing specific elements that were beginning to thin. Someone had been here, in this room, at this seal, working on it with their own hands, maintaining what was failing, adding what they could with the knowledge they had, which was incomplete, but real. With knowledge and care and the specific skill of someone who'd taught themselves the technique from old records, because there was no one left to teach them. Maren was looking at the seal with an expression I'd never seen on her face before, something between recognition and relief and grief. "He's been working on it," she said quietly. "Someone has been working on it. For years." She looked at me. Someone who learned the technique themselves, from documents, from the archive? "From the archive," I said. She looked at Paul. He looked at the floor. "I gave him access to the old collection 12 years ago," Paul said quietly. "He said he was doing historical research. He was very respectful of the materials," Paul said. "Always returned things exactly as he found them. He came back many times over those 12 years. I thought he was just thorough. And he took notes," I said. Paul nodded. "Detailed notes. I never read them. I didn't think it was my place." He looked up. "I think I made another wrong decision in retrospect. 12 years ago. Advisor Drax had begun his natural settling reports 12 years ago. He'd also begun visiting the archive 12 years ago. He'd found the old documents. He'd taught himself as much as those documents could teach someone working alone, without a teacher, without a living tradition to correct his mistakes or tell him where the gaps were. He'd taught himself an approximation of the sealing technique and spent 12 years doing what he could with an approximation, reinforcing the seals he could access, filing natural settling reports that kept official investigators away from the locations he couldn't personally access without triggering questions he didn't want to answer. I stood in that small sealed room and looked at the work someone had done alone for 12 years, with insufficient tools and incomplete knowledge. This is what it looks like, I thought, when someone tries to hold things together without the right qualifications. Messy, imperfect, and somehow, against all odds, mostly working. It was messy, it was imperfect. Some of the reinforcement work had actually introduced minor instabilities that a trained practitioner would have avoided, but it had slowed the decay, measurably. It had bought years. "And now I need to read the original lock," I said. "The ancient one. The one placed 400 years ago. I need to find the name." Maren and Paul stepped back. I knelt at the edge of the old stones, put both hands flat on the floor, and listened to the oldest layer of the room. The ancient seal spoke differently than the newer work above it. Where Drax's additions were tentative and effortful, the original was fluent, confident, the work of someone who'd grown up with this language, and woven into the anchor of the seal, as I'd hoped, as I'd told Maren I believed, the name, not hidden, simply waiting. Placed there specifically so that someone who came later, someone with the full language, someone trained properly, could find it and read it and use it for what it was meant for. The woman who had placed these seals 400 years ago had left the name in the anchor, not to guard it, to preserve it, in case the seal needed to be broken and rebuilt, in case someone came who would need to know the name and use it, someone trained in the living tradition, sent back from the forest, arriving 400 years late but still arriving, in case the seals were failing and the configuration was approaching, and someone arrived from the forest with 20 years of education and a specific problem to solve. She had expected this, she had planned for this, the chain of custody through the archive, the key, the name and the anchor of the oldest seal. She had built a path for whoever came next. I read the name, let it arrive in full in the old language with all of the information it carried. Held it for a moment, let it settle into me the way important things settle. It didn't land the way I'd expected names to land. Names in root speech carry information. They describe the thing rather than just labeling it, and this one was no exception. The name the stone below the Deep Market had been afraid to say wasn't a demon name, wasn't a name of power in the theatrical sense. It was a description. What the name meant, in full, in the idiom of the old language, was something like, the thing that was here before here was a name. The presence that predated the concept of location, that had been here before here, was a word, before this land had a name, before any language existed to describe where things were. Not a creature, not an entity with intentions and desires, something much older than intentions, something that had been present before the world had developed the vocabulary to describe presence. It had been here before language, before naming, before the specific human project of giving things titles so that other humans could refer to them in conversation. And someone, 400 years ago, had named it anyway, had used the old language to give it a name so that it could be addressed, so that it could be spoken to, so that someone who came later would have something to hold, a way to address it, a way to say hello. The name was a gift from 400 years ago to whoever showed up today. The woman who placed these seals had done the hardest part. She had taken something that predated language and given it one, so that the next person who came wouldn't start from nothing, so that 400 years later, when someone finally arrived with the right training, the name would be waiting. I said the name quietly, just once, just to feel how it moved in the air of that room and to feel how the room responded to hearing it spoken for the first time in 400 years. The room responded to the name in the way that things respond to being correctly identified after a long time of being referred to incorrectly. Not dramatically, not with light or sound, just a shift. But something in the quality of the air changed, the way a room changes when the right thing has finally been said in it. But the stone shifted the way stone shifts when it has been named, with the quality of something that has been acknowledged and is registering the acknowledgement. The seal below my hands vibrated, faintly, the name reaching down through the ancient lock and touching what was held below it. And what was held below reached back, not aggressively, not hungrily, the way something very old and very patient responds when someone finally learns how to say hello to it in its own language. I sat with that for a long moment, with the name, with the response, with the specific feeling of having found what I came for and understanding that finding it was only the beginning. With the name and what it meant and the specific gift of the woman who had placed it in the anchor 400 years ago, so someone like me could find it. Then I stood up. I have the name, I said. Maren and Paul were both looking at me with the specific expression of people who had felt something happen and couldn't quite describe what. We need to talk to Drax, I said. Today. Right now. Before he goes home or has a meeting or does anything else that puts distance between this moment and the conversation we need to have. That statement produced a long silence. Then Maren said, Kai, Drax doesn't know about us. As far as he knows, he's been managing this loan. Nobody else is in the picture as far as he's aware. As far as he knows, he's been managing a geological phenomenon that has something to do with old stone vibrations. He knows more than that, I said. He taught himself the technique from the archive. He's been reinforcing this seal for 6 years with his own hands in the middle of the night. He knows something is down there. What he doesn't know, I said, is what it is, or what to do about it, or that someone else is involved. What do you mean, someone else is involved? Paul said. He said it with the careful precision of someone who wants to be very sure they've understood correctly before reacting to what they've understood. The maintenance worker at the lighthouse 3 days ago, I said. Something in the network noticed him specifically, reached toward him in a specific and directed way. Something in the network noticed him specifically, which means something in the network is awake enough to notice individual people. But the seals are slowing the process, I said. The deep market seal is the most eroded, but even that one is still partially functional. The seals are still partially functional. The deep market seal is eroded, but still present. Something below should not yet be awake enough to notice and react to individual people walking near it. Unless, Maren said slowly, unless someone has been helping it wake up. Not slowing the decay, accelerating it in certain points, while Drax slows it in others. 2 people managing the same system with opposite intentions, I said, neither one knowing about the other, one trying to hold it back, one trying to bring it forward. The room was very quiet. Outside the sealed room, the old corridor, the pre-renovation section, the council building above it, the city on top of everything, all of it quiet in that moment. Someone else, Paul said. Someone besides Drax, who knows about the seals, who has been working against the same seals Drax has been trying to preserve? I looked at him. Yes, I said. And that person had been at the Deep Market Square. I'd seen a watcher there. I'd assumed it was Maren on one of her regular visits. But Maren had been home that morning. She'd been asleep when I arrived at her door before dawn. She'd told me so, which meant the person I'd seen watching the square at that hour had not been Maren. The watcher I'd seen at the square the morning I went to look at it, that hadn't been Maren. That had been someone else. Someone else who knew about the square and watched it regularly. We need to find Drax, I said. Now. Before whoever the other person is realizes we're moving. We found him in his office at the council chambers, which should not have been possible. Paul had said access to the main building required an appointment or official business, but Lena Saar was waiting at the front entrance. She'd gotten to the council building before all three of us, which I was starting to understand was probably just what Lena Saar did. She arrived first. She always arrived first. She had her city guard ID and a specific expression and an official-looking notebook held with the authority of important business. The entry guard had not felt it was his place to ask detailed questions about any of it, which was exactly the response she'd been going for and had achieved without apparent effort. "Good morning," she said to me, in the tone of someone who had been awake since at least 3 a.m. and was choosing not to make this everyone else's problem. "You got the note," I said. "Obviously," she said. She looked at the three of us. "You went in already." She could read it from how we were standing. I nodded. "Did you find what you were looking for?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "And more than I was looking for, which is both better and more complicated than only finding what you came for." Then I explained, briefly, what I'd found. The 2 locks, Drax's 12 years of work, the name, and the conclusion about a second actor working against Drax's efforts. Lena absorbed all of it in the way she absorbed everything, quickly, with the expression of someone filing each piece against everything else they already knew and checking for contradictions. Then she said, "Drax knows we're here," the entry guard told him when we arrived. "He's been in his office since before I got here. He's expecting a conversation." She'd given us no choice in this, which I thought was probably the right call, even if she'd made it unilaterally. Drax knew something was happening. The longer we waited, the more time his fear had to make decisions for him. Fear makes bad decisions quickly when left alone. We went up. His office was on the 3rd floor in the older part of the building. The window looked out at an angle of the city that included, if you knew where to look, the direction of the Deep Market. He knew where to look. I was certain of that. 12 years of watching the Deep Market from an office window. 12 years of knowing exactly which direction mattered most. He was standing at that window when we came in. He heard us enter and didn't turn around immediately, which was either composure or the last moments of someone deciding how to play an impossible hand. Then he turned around. Advisor Drax was older than I'd expected from the quality of the bureaucratic work. Not old, maybe 50, 55, but carrying more than those years. Not old in years, maybe 50, 55, but carrying more than those years could account for alone. The kind of aging that comes from sustained responsibility and sustained fear, not from time. In his face and his hands and the way he stood, the weight of someone who had been alone in something hard for a very long time and hadn't had anyone to put it down with. The specific weight of someone who has been holding something alone for a very long time, and it has aged them in ways that years alone couldn't account for. He looked at the 4 of us. His eyes moved. Assessed. He recognized Paul immediately. The archivist's face confirmed something he'd suspected. He recognized Lena's uniform. He didn't recognize Marin's face or mine. We were new variables in a situation he'd been managing in isolation for 12 years, and new variables in old situations produce very specific expressions. Then he looked at my eyes, and his expression changed in the specific way that Elder Sewell had described. The way people changed when they saw someone who saw too much. "You came out of the forest," he said. Not a question, not a greeting, just naming what he was looking at. "Yes," I said. He sat down, heavily, like someone who had been given permission. He sat down, heavily, the way someone sits when they've been standing inside a fear for 12 years and someone has just given them permission to put it down. "You know what's down there," he said. Not a question. "Yes," I said. "And I know what you've been doing about it for 12 years. I know about the archive visits. I know about the work you've been doing on the council chamber seal," I said. "The midnight visits, the reinforcement work, the 12 years of careful, alone, imperfect effort." He looked at his hands. 12 years, he said. "I found the documents in the archive by accident. I was doing legitimate research on pre-city land surveys. I found the map. I found the symbol. I spent 3 years trying to understand what it meant," he said. "By the time I understood, I was already filing reports on the ground movement because I didn't know what else to do. Natural settling kept engineers away from the locations," he said. "It kept people from investigating. It kept the squares and the foundations and the old stones away from official attention." He looked up. "I was buying time," he said. "I didn't know how much time I needed or what I'd do when I ran out of it. I just kept buying it. I thought eventually I'd figure out what to do, or that someone would eventually come who knew more than I did, who had the full language, who could do what I couldn't do with approximations and archive visits, or that someone would come who knew," I said. He nodded. "I know how that sounds. I know it sounds like I was just hoping someone else would solve it." He paused. "I was hoping someone else would come along who could solve it properly," he said. "I don't have the full language. What I've been working with for 12 years are approximations." His approximations had been working better than he knew, I told him. The reinforcement on the council chamber seal had slowed the decay in that location measurably. His natural settling reports had served their purpose. 12 years of keeping engineers and investigators away from 6 locations that couldn't withstand the wrong kind of scrutiny. He'd kept people alive and kept the seals partially functional for 12 years with approximations and cover stories and 3 in the morning visits to a room he didn't have official access to. That, I said, is actually a significant accomplishment. Working alone with incomplete information for 12 years and getting enough right to slow the decay measurably. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, "I'm not alone. That's the thing. I found out 2 years ago that I'm not alone in this." The room went quiet. "Found out how?" I said. He reached into his desk and pulled out a document, slid it across the desk toward me. "This arrived at my office 2 years ago," he said. "Unsigned," he said. "I don't know who sent it or how they knew I needed it." I looked at the document he'd slid across the desk. It was precise, complete, accurate in every detail I could check. It was a summary, in a hand I didn't recognize, in a mixture of Valar administrative language and imperfect root speech transliteration, of what was below the city. The name, the configuration, the 11 days. Someone had sent Drax a summary of exactly what was happening 2 years ago, with the 11-day endpoint calculated correctly, without signing their name. He'd known about the 11 days for 2 years, known the endpoint, known the configuration, and had spent 2 years trying to hold things together, knowing exactly what he was holding them against. He'd been trying to manage a process he understood better than before, but still didn't know how to stop, alone, while knowing the endpoint was approaching. "Do you know who sent this?" I said. He shook his head. "I've tried to find out. I found one thing. The document was prepared in the Deep Market area. A specific paper merchant there, but who bought the paper and when and how they knew to buy it for this purpose that I couldn't trace. The trail stopped at a paper merchant's supply records and went no further." "Marin," I said without looking away from Drax, "did you send this?" I felt rather than saw her reaction. A pause. Then, "No," she said. "I would have signed it if I had." "Paul," I said. He said, "Also no. I didn't know enough 2 years ago to write this. I'm not sure I know enough now. Someone had known enough 2 years ago to write a precise and fully accurate technical summary of everything happening below this city, and had sent it to the one person already working on it, and had sent it anonymously to the one person already trying to do something about it, without revealing themselves, without asking for anything in return, someone who had precise knowledge, who knew Drax was working on the problem, who had decided to give him more information without revealing themselves. That, I said to Drax, is not the behavior of someone who wants the sequence to complete. That's the behavior of someone trying to help stop it, without revealing themselves as someone who understands what's below this city, someone who has knowledge that would raise very uncomfortable questions if it became known they had it." He looked at me. "I'd considered that," he said carefully, "but I'd also considered that it might be someone who wanted me to know the deadline, to make me more desperate, more likely to make mistakes. That was good thinking from Drax. He had been right to be cautious about it. He'd been right about a great many things, which made his situation both more understandable and more sad. He'd been working alone with imperfect tools for 12 years, and he'd been right about almost everything he'd done, even when he hadn't known why he was doing it. There's a second possibility I need to tell you about," I said. "I've been operating on the assumption that you're the only person in the city actively managing the seals. I was wrong. I told him about the Watcher at the square, the figure I'd seen the morning I first went to the Deep Market. Not Marin. Someone else, watching the square regularly, with the specific attention of someone who understood what they were looking at, and about the maintenance worker at the lighthouse. The way the something below had noticed him specifically, had reached toward him in a way that shouldn't have been possible with the seals still partially functional. If someone has been accelerating the decay at some locations while you've been slowing it at others," I said, "then you've been working against each other. The overall rate of decay has been carefully managed," I said, "but toward the end point, not away from it. You've been unknowingly providing the stability that allowed someone else to run the clock." Drax was very still. Then he said, "The Deep Market seal. I've never been able to reinforce it. Every time I try to access the square, the seal resists my approximations. I assumed it was the quality of my technique. It wasn't your technique," I said. "Someone has been working against the Deep Market seal specifically, making it harder to reinforce, accelerating its decay while keeping the others stable enough to avoid triggering immediate collapse. A controlled sequence," he said slowly. "Not random decay. Staged decay," he said. "Someone who understands the structure well enough to know which seals to accelerate and which ones to leave for me to maintain. Without knowing I was there," I said. "Or," I stopped. "Or knowing you were there and counting on you to maintain the ones they weren't accelerating, doing half the work of the sequence. Letting you do the other half." He looked sick. I think I need to sit down, he said. He was already sitting. I let that pass. You've been used, I said. Not maliciously. You were doing genuinely useful work, but someone knew you were doing it and arranged the rest of the sequence around your efforts. Who? Lena said. She'd been quiet through most of this, standing near the door with her arms crossed and her expression doing the rapid cataloging work it always did. Who has that level of knowledge and that level of access? Someone who's been in the city for a long time, I said. Someone who knows the locations well enough to have watched them regularly. Who sent Drax accurate information 2 years ago, which means they've known the full picture for at least that long. Someone who knows root speech well enough to affect the decay of a seal, but who has been careful not to use it in ways that would be obvious to a trained practitioner, I said. I thought about the person I'd seen at the Deep Market Square, the specific quality of their attention. Not Marin's attention, different in a way I'd noted but not fully processed at the time. The person at the square hadn't been checking on the seal the way Marin checked on things. They'd been watching the square the way you watch something that's doing what you need it to do, the satisfaction of monitoring progress. I need to find them, I said. 8 days. We have 8 days before the configuration arrives. I need to find whoever the second actor is, understand what they want and why, and then, depending on that answer, either stop them or work with them. Work with them, Marin said. She said it with this specific flatness of someone who finds a suggestion deeply counterintuitive but is keeping an open mind. They've been accelerating the decay of the seals, Kai, Marin said. She said it with the flatness of someone who finds a suggestion deeply counterintuitive but is keeping the door open. They sent Drax useful information 2 years ago, I said. They've been managing a controlled sequence rather than a chaotic collapse. That's someone with a plan. A plan might be negotiable. Or it might not be, Lena said. Either way, we need to find them first. She looked at Drax. You have resources we don't. City council access? Administrative authority? You can open the kind of inquiry that moves fast and stays quiet and gets results before the wrong people hear about it. That's what we need. Fast and quiet. Drax nodded. He looked, for the first time since we'd come into his office, like someone who had been carrying a weight alone and had just realized there were enough of them to split it. What do you need from me? He said. Everything you have on unusual activity around the 6 locations over the last 2 years, I said. Anyone who has requested access to any of the 6 sites. Any documents filed about those locations through any office? Any requests for access? Any records at all? And I said, there's one more thing I need from you. I need you to formally reverse the natural settling conclusions on the 17 reports. I need an official record that there's something real happening below this city. Not for the public yet, but on record, in case something goes wrong and someone needs to understand what happened. He looked at me for a long moment, then he reached for a pen. We spent 3 hours in that office. By the end, we had a picture. Not complete, but more complete than any of us had alone. The second actor had been in the city for at least 6 years, based on when the Deep Market Seal's decay had accelerated beyond what the natural erosion of 4 centuries could account for. They had knowledge of root speech, a knowledge of the 6 locations, and knowledge of the configuration timeline. They had been careful, very careful. The kind of careful that only comes from doing something for a long time and learning through experience exactly how much visibility is too much visibility, but they had a pattern. Drax's records, cross-referenced with Paul's archive access logs and Marin's weekly observations, showed a rhythm, a regular interval, a specific set of days each month when something in the condition of the Deep Market Seal shifted. Not randomly, not through natural erosion, but in a pattern that had its own rhythm. The pattern pointed to someone who came to the Deep Market on a schedule, not daily, not even weekly, but consistently on specific days for at least 6 years. I know this schedule, Marin said quietly. She'd been looking at the dates. I've noted it in my own records. I thought it was natural variation in the seal's condition, a regular fluctuation. She looked up at us. And I've seen someone in the Deep Market on those days. I never paid attention because they seemed like a regular market visitor. But now I'm thinking about it. The same person, same days, same route. Who is it? I said. She shook her head. I don't know their name. I've seen their face. An older man, older than me, moves slowly but watches everything. Has a habit of stopping at old stones and looking at them for a moment before continuing. The way someone stops, who can feel what's in the stone and wants to take a quick reading. An older man who stopped at old stones, who watched everything, who had been visiting the Deep Market on a specific schedule for at least 6 years. Someone who could feel what was in the stones, someone who had their own version of root speech, learned differently than mine or Drax's approximations. Something older, something inherited. Something that had been passed down the way Marin's awareness had been passed down by her grandmother, but more completely, more usefully. I have 8 days, I said. 8 days to find this person, understand what they want, and decide what to do about it. That decision depends entirely on the answer to the want question. Because if he wants what I think he might want, not destruction, not catastrophe, but something specific that he believes can only happen when the configuration arrives, then the answer might not be to stop him. The answer might be to understand what he's trying to finish, and whether finishing it is something we can live with, or whether it's something that simply ends the city I grew up in and everyone who has built their lives in it. 8 days, Lena said. She said it cleanly, without drama. She said it the way she said everything, efficiently, with the implication that she had already started working on the problem and would be done with this portion of it shortly. 8 days. I looked at the four of them. Drax, with his 12 years of alone, Marin, with her 40, Paul, with his 300 years of archive custody and his very old key, Lena, with her 8 months of watching the wrong sky and her habit of writing things down that no one would listen to. A city was not lost yet. It had time, and it had people in it who had been quietly paying attention for decades, and it had me, which was something Elder Sewell had been planning for 20 years. 8 days. Let's find out exactly what we're actually dealing with. And then let's deal with it correctly. That was the plan. That had to be enough of a plan for now. I found him on the 5th day, which left 3 days before the configuration arrived, and either everything worked or it didn't. His name was Shen Vai. Marin had seen his face for years and noted his visits, but had never had a name for him. Lena found it in the Deep Market Trader registration records. Lena found the name through the registration records of the Deep Market Traders. He'd rented a small storage space there for 6 years, paid in advance, never caused problems. He was listed as a herbalist, age listed as 72. I looked at that number for a long moment when Lena showed me the record. 72? He was not 72. I could tell from the moment I saw him properly. Standing at the edge of the Deep Market Square at dawn, doing exactly what Marin had described, stopping at old stones, feeling them, noting what they said to him. He was much older than 72, much older than anyone I'd met in Valor, much older possibly than the city itself. I walked up to him directly, not from behind, not cautiously, directly. If he was what I thought he was, caution wouldn't help, and directness would be the thing he respected. He heard me coming and didn't turn around. Let me close the distance. The specific stillness of someone who has been alive long enough to know exactly what is approaching from the sound alone. The specific stillness of someone who has been alive long enough that they can tell exactly what's approaching from the sound of footsteps alone. My name is Kai Ash, I said. I came out of the sacred forest 8 days ago. I know about the 6 seals. I know about the configuration. I know the name. I'd like to talk. He turned around. His face was the kind of face that was so old it had stopped being wrinkled in the way old faces are wrinkled, and had, instead, become something simpler and more permanent. His eyes were the color of old stone, not gray, the specific warm brown of stone that has been in the same place for long enough to have absorbed the color of the earth around it. He looked at me. Not at my face, at me. The way someone looks when they can see what the Rootborn had put in me over 20 years and are taking stock of it. You have the speech, he said. The real one. His voice was the same as his face, not aged so much as settled. Arrived at some final form and comfortable in it. Yes, I said. I was trained by Elder Sewell for 20 years. He nodded. She is well, I hope, he said. I said she was well when I left. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, You found the name. From the old seal. Yes, I said. He nodded again. Then I have a great deal to explain to you and not very much time left in which to do it. He asked me to walk with him, and I did, along the canal path where the morning was quiet enough for a very long conversation that needed to start from the beginning. We walked the canal path, which was quiet in the early morning, and gave us privacy without requiring any of the deliberate maneuvers that would have made the conversation feel like a secret. I am the last of the original builders, he said, not the woman who placed the seals. She was not a builder. She was a stopper. The builders were my people. He said it without drama. Simply. The way you say something that has been true for so long that the weight of it has settled into ordinary fact. My people built the structure, he said. The 6-point diagram in the bedrock. We placed it there before this city existed, before this land had a human name. We built it as a house. A house, I said. For what? He didn't answer immediately. He stopped walking and looked at the canal, the way someone looks at a thing when they're deciding how to begin a very long explanation. He stopped walking and looked at the canal for a long moment, with the expression of someone assembling an explanation that had never needed to be assembled into words before. The expression of someone choosing how to explain something that has been part of their understanding for so long that finding the right entry point is genuinely difficult. For what? I said again. He turned from the canal and looked at me and began to explain. Not simply, there was no simple version, but completely, from the beginning. For the thing that was here before language, he said. The thing that predated names. You've read the name now. You know what it means. You know what it is. I did know. The description of it that the name carried, the presence that predated location, wasn't a description of a monster or a catastrophe. It was a description of something that had been here before the concept of here had existed, before location was a meaningful category, before the world had divided itself into places and things. It was the last of the old world, he said. The world before the world was named and divided and made into separate things. It had stayed here after everything else in the old world changed, because it had always been here and had no concept of leaving, no understanding that leaving was something that could be done. It's not dangerous, I said. He looked at me. Not in itself, he said. No, it's ancient and patient and has no intention toward harm, but it is enormous. And when it wakes, the waking is enormous. If it wakes through the wrong sequence, I said, thinking of what Marin had told me, the diagram activates wrong. The structure becomes real in the wrong way. Yes, he said. If it wakes through failing seals in the wrong order, the structure that was built to house it, to give it a shape, to give it edges so it doesn't overflow into everything, that structure fails, he said. And something that has no shape or edge or boundary floods, not with malice, just because it has no other way to be. Without the structure to give it edges, it simply exists everywhere at once. Not aggressively, not with any destructive intent. Just as water exists everywhere when there is no container to hold it. Just present in the way water is present when there is no container. Filling everything, becoming everything it touches. And the city, I said. He nodded. The city cannot contain it without the structure. The city would cease to exist as a city, as a place, as anything separately describable. Everything would become continuous with everything else. The city would not be destroyed so much as it would simply stop being distinct from everything around it, which is effectively the same thing. Not death, he said carefully. Not destruction, but a dissolution that would be indistinguishable from destruction to anyone living here. So yes, the city, as such, would end. Why, I said, why did you accelerate the decay of the seals? If you knew this, if you know what happens when they fail wrong. He was quiet for a long time, long enough that we'd walked the full length of the canal path and come to the far end before he answered. Because, he said, the seals are not the right house. The woman 400 years ago, she stopped a waking that was already beginning. She placed the seals in haste, under real pressure, using the best technique available to her at that moment, which was considerable, but not the same as what the original builders had used. And they worked, he said. For 400 years they worked. But they were built to hold, not to house, to stop, not to shape. They're a dam, not a riverbed. And the thing below, I said, has been pressing against the dam for 400 years. He nodded. A dam can only hold so long, and the longer it holds, the more pressure builds behind it. When a dam finally gives way, it's worse than if it had never been built, I said. He nodded. Yes. So what's the alternative? I said. He stopped walking, turned to face me. The original structure, he said. The 6-point diagram. Not as a container, not as a dam, as a riverbed. Something that gives the waking a shape it can move through without flooding. Something that says, here are your edges. The woman 400 years ago placed the seals over the structure, he said, to stop the waking. I have spent 6 years weakening those seals at the right points. Not to let it wake wrong, but to clear the path back to the original structure. If the seals fail in the right sequence, he said, the original diagram activates, not as a prison, as a shape. The thing below wakes along the lines of that shape, contained within it, given the edges it had never had before, shaped into something that can exist alongside a city rather than instead of one. And Valor, I said. What happens to Valor? He met my eyes. The forest returns, he said. The edge of it. Not all of it. The city doesn't vanish, but the sacred forest would reclaim ground it had lost, the edge of it moving closer to the city center. Some of the old neighborhoods near the tree line would change, he said. Some buildings would be lost to the forest. Some ground the city had taken would be taken back. That was the cost. He said it plainly. I thought about Valor's old neighborhoods near the tree line. The old neighborhoods near the tree line, he said, they would change. Some of them would become forest again. The people there would need to move. Some buildings would be lost. But the city itself would remain, he said. Changed, yes, with a sacred forest closer to its center than it had been in 2 centuries. But remaining, intact, as a place where people lived, with something old living in the earth below it that is now, at last, after many centuries, properly housed. I looked at him for a long time. He was very still, the kind of still that came from having lived long enough that patience had become physical. Why not tell someone, I said. Why do it alone? Why not come to Drax, or Marin, or... Who would I tell? He said quietly. I've been in this city for 60 years. I arrived here when I was already old, already older than this city's oldest resident, though I told no one that. I found the watchers were gone. I found one woman watching the squares, he said. Maren. But she didn't have the language and she didn't know the full picture. I watched her. I respected her. But I couldn't explain to her what I was doing without explaining everything. And everything is very long. He looked at me. And I didn't know that someone was coming, he said. I was doing the best I could alone, hoping the structure would activate cleanly when the configuration arrived, hoping that without anyone to guide it, hoping that the thing below was patient enough and aware enough to find its own shape when the path was cleared, I said. Yes, he said. You came 8 days before the end. He looked at me with the specific expression of someone who has been doing something alone for a very long time and has just been joined. I am very glad you came, he said. Not with relief exactly. More with the specific quality of someone who has been doing something difficult alone for a very long time and has just been joined. I told him about Drax, about 12 years of natural settling reports and 3 a.m. SEAL reinforcement work. He listened. He was very still throughout. When I finished, he said, he's been working against me for 12 years. Not deliberately. He didn't know I existed. But every reinforcement Drax placed on the deep market SEAL delayed what I was trying to do by months, working against me for 12 years without knowing I existed, without knowing any of this. And every month of delay, I said, pressed the configuration arrival closer to a point where the SEALs would be in a worse state than you intended. He nodded. If the deep market SEAL had been in better condition when the configuration arrived, the sequence would have been cleaner, safer, more controlled. Instead, it was the most eroded of all 6. Instead, I said, it's in the worst condition of all 6, which is the worst possible order for the sequence. He nodded again, which is why 3 days is not very much time. We went to find the others. All of them, Drax and Maren and Paul and Lena, gathered at Maren's apartment because Maren's apartment had the wall diagram, and the wall diagram was what we needed. Drax and Maren and Paul and Lena gathered at Maren's apartment because Maren's apartment had the wall, and the wall had the diagram, and the diagram was what we needed to look at. Shenvai stood in front of the wall for a long time, looking at Maren's 40 years of work. Not speaking, just looking. You've mapped the connections correctly, he said finally. All of them, across 40 years of watching. He turned to look at Maren directly. You've been working from a wrong premise about what the 6 points actually are. But the mapping itself, the connections, the relationships, the structure you've built on this wall, that is correct. You've been working from the wrong premise, assuming the 6 points were 6 separate seals, but the mapping is correct. Maren looked at the wall she had been building for 40 years. All these years, she said quietly. She didn't say anything else. She didn't need to. It was all already on the wall. This is what we need to do, Shenvai said. He began to explain, clearly, precisely, in the way of someone who has been waiting a very long time to explain something to someone who would understand it. 3 of the 6 points needed to be fully released. The seals dissolved entirely rather than simply weakened, because in the original structure, those points were channels, not anchors. 3 of them needed to be renewed, but renewed correctly, in the old way, with the old technique, not Drax's approximations. I can renew 3 seals, I said, in 3 days. If I know which 3, he told me which 3. I looked at the diagram. The pattern made sense. The 3 that needed releasing were the ones that, in the original structure, were channels rather than anchors. The 3 that needed renewal were the anchors, the cornerstones of the diagram. If they held, the structure would activate along the released channels and the thing below would wake into a shape rather than into chaos. What do you need from me? Drax said. He'd been quiet through most of Shenvai's explanation, absorbing it. 12 years of alone, recontext in a single morning. From you, Shenvai said, I need you to use everything you've learned. Your reinforcement technique is imperfect, but it works. 3 days, you can strengthen the 3 anchor seals alongside Kai's renewal work. 2 sets of hands are better than 1. Drax looked at his hands. 12 years of practicing an approximation of an ancient art, alone, in the dark, without knowing if any of it was working. He nodded. From me, Maren said. She didn't wait to be asked. What do I do? Shenvai looked at her with an expression I couldn't quite read. From you, he said quietly, I need you to watch, to record. He paused. What happens in 3 days, whatever happens, needs to be recorded correctly. Not as a geological event, not as natural settling, as what it is. Someone needs to write down what it was, what it is, why the seals existed, what we did about them, and how any of it ended. For whoever comes next. For the archive. She looked at him. Then she nodded. 40 years, she'd been watching. Writing things down. This was the thing she'd been writing toward. Lena, I said. She looked at me. I need you to clear the areas around the 3 anchor points. Not dramatically. Just keep people moving. Keep the squares and foundations accessible. And I need someone watching all 6 locations through the night before the configuration. She pulled out the notebook that always seemed to be in her hand. Already writing. Understood, she said. Paul, I said. The archive. The founding document that mentioned the maintenance agreements as essential. I need you to write an addendum, the actual explanation, for whoever comes next. Paul looked at me. You think there will be a whoever comes next? He said, with the careful tone of someone who finds optimism difficult but is trying. I think there better be, I said. That left the largest question, which everyone in the room was politely not mentioning. The conversation I still needed to have, not with the people in this room, with the thing below. I need to talk to it, I said. Before we begin, I need to... He stopped. He'd been about to say something and reconsidered. Go on, I said. I need to speak to it directly, I said. Not through the seals, not through the stone's memory. Actually address it. Tell it what we're planning and give it the information it needs to make a choice. To give it the choice about how it wants to wake up, since it's going to wake up either way and it's been patient enough to deserve being consulted. Shenvai looked at me. Choice, he said. He said it with the specific quality of someone who has considered something for a very long time and reached a complicated conclusion about it. It's been waiting for 400 years, I said. It's been patient. It's been aware. The name exists precisely so that someone could address it directly. I'm going to address it directly and tell it what the options are, I said. Because the name exists precisely so that someone could do that. And because 400 years of patience deserves at least a conversation before someone else decides how the next part of your existence is going to go. That seemed only fair to me. And if it doesn't want the original structure, I said, if it's been waiting for something else, if what it wants and what we're planning don't align, then I need to know that before we start, I said. Not after. Not when we're 3 seals into an irreversible process and the configuration is 6 hours away. Before. The room was quiet. Then Shenvai said, I've never tried to speak to it. It didn't occur to me that it was something that could be spoken to. He paused. The name was given so someone could address it. You're right, he said. A long pause, and then, I should have thought of that. 60 years in the city, 6 years managing the sequence, and it didn't occur to me that it might want to be asked. I went to the Deep Market Square alone. Not at dawn this time. At noon, when the light was at its strongest and the stone was warmest and the city was at its most present around me. I walked to the very center of the square, stepped onto the old stones that had been here before the city, before the language, before anyone had thought to give this place a name, put my hands flat, and said the name. Said it fully, in the old language, with all the context and weight it carried. The way you say hello to something when you mean for it to hear you and respond. The square went quiet. Not the ordinary quiet of a street that is temporarily emptied. A different quiet, the quality of attention. Then I talked to it, in root speech, slowly, the way Elder Sewell had taught me to speak to things very much older than myself, with respect and directness, and without the pretense that you know more than you do. I told it what was happening, what the seals were doing, what the configuration would trigger, what the options were as I understood them. I told it about Shenvai's plan, about the original structure, about what the waking through the correct channels would look like, what the waking through the failing seals would look like. I told it that it had been here longer than language, and we were asking it to trust us with the next part of its existence, that we were working from imperfect information and imperfect technique and doing our best. And then I stopped talking, put my hands flat on the old stones, and listened. It took a long time, much longer than I had expected, kneeling on old stones in the center of the Deep Market Square with the city moving around me and not quite registering what I was doing. Long enough that a few people walked through the square around me and gave me the same look the man had given me when I had my hand on the wall on my first day in the city. I ignored the looks people gave me. I was having a conversation with something 400 years older than this city, and the conversation was more important than the looks. What came back through the stone was not words. Root speech doesn't work like that with something this old. Words came later, much later. What came first was memory. Memory of what this land had been, before the city, before the roads, before the first humans had arrived and started calling things by names. Forest. All of it was forest, from the water's edge to the mountains, and the memory it was showing me. Old growth that had been growing for so long, it was more geography than biology. Old growth. The kind that takes centuries to develop, with the specific quality of a living thing that has been growing for so long, it has become something closer to geography than biology. And the thing below, present in all of it, not separate from the forest. Part of it, the deepest root of it, if roots can be understood as something that extends in all directions and has no bottom. Then the memory shifted. The city arriving in stages. The clearing of the forest. The cutting and building and naming and expansion. Recorded without anger. Just the neutral memory of something that had watched it all. Not with anger. just the neutral recording of something that had been present through all of it and had watched it happen. The forest retreating, the city growing, the old things becoming smaller, quieter, more inward-facing as the human world expanded over and around them. And through all of it, patient, not angry, not afraid, just waiting. Waiting for what? I asked, putting the question into the stone with both hands, and everything I had learned about how to ask. What came back was not an answer in any language. It was something closer to an image. The forest and the city together, not one replacing the other, not in conflict, but alongside. The edge of the forest much closer than it currently was. Something old living in the ground below a city that knew it was there. A city that had made space for it. A city that had looked up at the sky above it and understood that the quality of the light was a reflection of something below, and had decided that was acceptable. Not restoration of the old world, not the end of the new one, something that hadn't existed before. A third thing. Was that what it wanted? I asked, pressing the question into the stone with everything I had. Was that what 400 years of patient waiting had been building toward? That third thing. The stone under my hands warmed, just slightly, the way stone warms when something very deep below it has been activated. Not heat, warmth. The specific warmth of something alive and old acknowledging something. Yes was not a word it knew, but it was the quality of what came back. I stood up. My knees ached from kneeling on old stone for longer than I'd realized, and the light had shifted. I'd been there for nearly 2 hours. Okay, I said, out loud, to the square, to the city above and the presence below and the 400 years between them. Let's do this right. The 3 days that followed were the hardest thing I had done since leaving the forest. Not dramatic hard, not the kind of hard that makes good stories afterward. Just sustained, technical, exhausting work that had to be done correctly every step of the way because there was no room for errors and no time to redo anything that went wrong. The kind of hard that doesn't make good stories because it doesn't have dramatic moments, just a long sequence of concentrated effort repeated until the thing is done. Renewing the 3 anchor seals meant going to each of the 3 locations and doing the work that the woman 400 years ago had done, with better training than Drax, but worse equipment than the original builders, and considerably less time than anyone would have preferred. Drax worked alongside me at 2 of them. His approximations, applied over the renewed foundation of real technique, produced something better than either of us could have done alone. He didn't say much, neither did I. There wasn't very much to say. The work required the kind of attention that excluded conversation. But by the second location, I had the sense of someone who had spent 12 years alone in something finally having a partner in it, and the specific relief of that. Shenbai dissolved the 3 channel seals. He was better at this than I'd expected. Old and slow in body, but when it came to the language, he was fluent in a way I wasn't. The original tradition, not learned from books or a teacher, but inherited, passed down through whatever remained of his people. He'd been the last of his people for a very long time. He said it without self-pity or drama. I didn't ask how long, because some answers to that question don't land in a useful way. Marin wrote everything down, every step, every decision, every adjustment we made when something didn't work as expected. She wrote the way she watched, with total attention and no drama and no self-insertion into what she was documenting. 40 years of watching had prepared her perfectly for this. She was the only person in the room who was completely calm throughout. Lena kept the areas clear. She managed the questions and the proximity and the occasional official curiosity about what 4 people were doing at old foundations and disused wells across 6 parts of the city. She was creative about explanations, I gathered. I deliberately didn't ask what she told people. Not knowing seemed like a better position for everyone to be in. She was creative about explanations. I didn't ask what she said because I thought not knowing was probably better for everyone. On the night before the configuration, we gathered at the Deep Market Square. All 5 of us. The square was empty. Lena had arranged that. The configuration began just before midnight. The sky changed first. The wrong color that had been wrong for over a year finally changed. Not to ordinary sky, to something older, something that remembered what sky had looked like before cities had existed to change the quality of the light falling from it, before everything below the sky started pulling at it. The stone began to vibrate, not the slow, deep wrong heartbeat I'd felt on my first day in the city, something different, the rhythm of something waking in the right way, through prepared channels, into a prepared shape with edges given to it rather than forced upon it. The difference between a riverbed and a dam. I held the anchor seals with everything I had. Drax was beside me, reinforcing, his 12 years of imperfect practice suddenly finding its best expression in supporting rather than leading. Shenbai stood at the center of the square on the old stones, in the position that the original builders would have stood in when the structure was first activated. He looked in that moment exactly as old as he was. The forest moved. You could hear it from the square, which was not possible in ordinary circumstances. The forest was half a mile away, but the configuration wasn't ordinary circumstances, and what was below the city was waking into something that the forest was part of. A sound like the deepest note a very large thing could make. Not a sound you heard with your ears. Not exactly. A sound you felt in the stone and in the air and in the center of your chest where things registered that ears couldn't reach. A sound you felt in the stone under your feet and in the air around you and somewhere in the center of your chest where things registered that your ears couldn't reach. The diagram activated. I felt it happen, not explosively. The way a large and complex thing settles into the position it was built for, with a kind of release that is enormous in scale and very quiet in character. The anchor seals I was holding flared. Everything I had went into holding them. 3 years of Elder Sewell's hardest lessons compressed into one long minute of pure effort. And then it was done. The square was different. Not dramatically. Nothing had collapsed, nothing had broken. The stones were where they had been. But the quality of the air was different. The quality of the light was different. The sky above was the right color. For the first time in more than a year, the light falling on Valor was ordinary light, not pulled at from below. Because what was below wasn't pulling anymore. What was below was housed, shaped, given the edges it had been waiting for. Shenvai sat down on the old stones. He looked very tired. He looked finally exactly as old as he was, without any of the particular quality of someone who is sustaining something. He'd been sustaining the plan, the intention, the possibility of the right outcome, through 60 years of alone in a city that didn't know he was there. Now the structure itself would sustain what it was meant to sustain. After 60 years of alone in a city that didn't know he was there, Shenvai could finally stop holding it together by himself. Holding the plan, holding the intention, holding the possibility of the right outcome through 60 years of alone in a city that didn't know he existed. He'd stopped. He could stop. The forest near the city's edge had moved during the night, not dramatically, a few streets worth in the neighborhoods near the tree line. The sacred forest had reclaimed ground that had been clear for the 100 years since the last expansion of the city. Some buildings there had been empty for years, some were not. Those residents were going to wake up to a very confusing morning, and Drax was already drafting the administrative response that would handle it. He'd been drafting it in his head throughout the night. I'd seen him doing it. Some people process enormous things by immediately planning the paperwork. It's a valid coping mechanism. I had no criticism of it. I walked to the edge of the city, to the new edge where the forest had moved. It was just past dawn. The trees were closer than they'd been the day before. A few streets worth of sacred forest had returned to being sacred forest. The change was visible from the road if you knew where to look. The quality of the air was different near them, the specific quality of air in a place where something very old has just settled into something it was made for. Elder Sewell was at the tree line. Not fully, not in the way she was in the forest. She was present at the edge of it, which was not something that was possible in ordinary circumstances. The Rootborn didn't stand at city edges. The city edges stood at the forest. But the forest was closer now, and the edges were different, and she was there. "You did well, small one," she said. "You could have told me what to expect," I said. "I could have," she said. She looked at me with the ancient hollow eyes that saw too much. "Would it have changed what you did?" "Probably not," I admitted. "Then what it would have changed was your experience of doing it," she said. "Not the outcome, the experience. And I decided that your experience of it should be your own." I thought about arguing with that logic and decided against it. She had 400 years on me in terms of experience with this specific kind of conversation, and she would simply wait. She would simply wait until I was done, with the patience of something that had been practicing patience for 4 centuries. And then she would look at me with those ancient hollow eyes, and I would feel exactly as I felt now, that I was 5 years old and she was 4 centuries old, and there was no argument to be had. "Is it settled?" I asked. "What's below? Is it right now? Stable?" "It is what it always was," she said. "Only now it knows what shape it is. That changes a great deal." "What happens in 400 years," I said, "when the configuration comes around again?" She looked at me. "You will be here," she said. I stopped. She didn't say anything else about that. Just looked at me with the expression of someone who has said exactly what they intended to say and doesn't feel the need to say more. I turned and looked at the city. Valor in the early morning, with the light finally the right color and the forest finally closer and the stone under the streets finally quiet in the right way. A city that had been sitting on something enormous for its entire existence and had just learned to live with that knowledge. That was going to be a significant adjustment, but cities adjust. They're made of people who adjust. It's one of the things they're for. "I'm staying," I told Elder Sewell. She nodded like she'd known. She probably had. "There's work here," I said. "The archive needs someone who can read the old documents properly. Marin can't do it alone forever. Drax is going to need help explaining what happened to people who weren't in the Deep Market Square at midnight. And in 400 years," I said, When the configuration comes around again, someone is going to need to be here who remembers how to do this correctly. That person needs to exist. Elder Soul looked at me for a long moment. Then she said what she'd said to me the first night I was in the forest, when I was 5 years old and didn't understand it. "You are not lost, small one," she said. She paused. "You are exactly where you're supposed to be." The same words as the first night, 20 years ago, with a different meaning now. She stepped back into the trees. The forest closed around her, the new edge of the forest, closer to the city than it had been in 2 centuries. I turned around and walked back into Valor. The stone of the streets remembered me now, after 8 days. They had adjusted to the weight of my footsteps, the specific pattern of how I moved. The city remembered me. A city that had declared me dead 20 years ago had spent 8 days learning me again. That seemed about right. Everything takes the time it takes. Cities, forests, ancient presences, the careful process of being remembered back into existence. You can't rush any of it. Even the decision about what to do with what you find when you finally go looking for what's been waiting underground for 400 years, and deserves better than another 400 of the same. Marin was in her apartment, still writing. She'd been writing all night. She looked up when I came in. "Is it done?" she said. "Yes," I said. She nodded, looked back at her page, kept writing. 40 years, I thought. 40 years of watching and writing and waiting for someone to arrive, who knew what to do. And when the someone finally arrived, she got to work alongside them without ceremony or fuss. And then when it was over, she just kept writing. Because that was the job, and the job wasn't done. There are people who make things possible by showing up at the critical moment. And there are people who make things possible by watching for 40 years and writing everything down. Marin was the second kind. The world needs both. But it depends on the second kind more than it knows, and usually more than it acknowledges while it's happening. And there are people who make things possible by showing up every week for 40 years and writing carefully. Marin was the second kind. And then there's the second kind, the ones who show up every week for 40 years without recognition or drama, writing things down because someone has to. The world depends on the second kind, more than it acknowledges while it's happening. More than it ever writes down, which is its own kind of irony, badly, equally. I sat down across from her and picked up the cup of tea she'd left for me. It was cold. I didn't care. "Thanks," I said. She made a small acknowledging sound without looking up from her page. That was enough. That was exactly enough. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. I'll see you next time.